Most people don't want the truth. They want reassurance that they're already right. This lesson reveals an uncomfortable reality about human psychology. The mind is not wired to seek truth. It is wired to protect identity. When someone shares an opinion, belief, or decision, they are rarely inviting correction. They are inviting validation. Agreement feels safe because it confirms that their internal story about who they are and how they see the world is intact. The moment truth threatens that story, the brain interprets it as danger. Logic shuts down, emotions rise, and defensiveness takes over. This is why facts often fail to change minds, even when the evidence is overwhelming. Being wrong feels like a loss of status, intelligence, and control, so the mind instinctively resists it. People don't argue to discover reality. They argue to defend their self-image. They selectively listen, dismiss opposing views, and emotionally reward anyone who echoes their perspective. Reassurance activates comfort. Truth activates discomfort. And discomfort is something most people spend their lives avoiding. This is why honest people are often labeled as rude, difficult, or negative. Truth disrupts emotional equilibrium. It forces reflection, accountability, and change. Reassurance allows people to stay exactly where they are while feeling justified. Understanding this lesson changes how you communicate. You realize that resistance is rarely about your message, but about what your message threatens inside the other person. The need to feel right is stronger than the desire to grow, and until someone values growth over comfort, truth will always feel like an attack. Being liked often matters more to people than being honest. This lesson exposes a quiet trade most people make without realizing it. They exchange authenticity for acceptance. From an early age, humans learn that approval equals safety. Smiles, praise, and inclusion signal that we belong, and belonging feels essential to survival. Honesty, on the other hand, carries risk. It can create tension, rejection, or conflict, which the brain interprets as social danger. Because of this, many people soften their opinions, hide their true feelings, or stay silent even when something feels wrong. They learn to say what is agreeable instead of what is real. Being liked provides immediate emotional reward, while honesty often brings delayed consequences and discomfort. The brain naturally chooses the faster relief. This is why people agree when they don't mean it, laugh at jokes they don't find funny, and stay quiet when boundaries are crossed. Honesty threatens connection, and connection feels more valuable than truth in the moment. The fear isn't just about being disliked, but about being excluded, judged, or seen as difficult. Over time, this pattern shapes identity. People begin to lose track of what they actually think because they are constantly filtering themselves through others' expectations. The version of them that gets approval slowly replaces the version that is real. The emotional cost appears later as resentment, exhaustion, and a sense of being unseen. When being liked becomes the priority, honesty feels dangerous, even to oneself. And the more someone depends on approval, the harder it becomes to tell the truth without fear of losing the very acceptance they've built their life around. Your tone matters more than your words. This lesson highlights how human communication is driven far more by emotion than logic. Words carry information, but tone carries intention. Before the brain processes what is being said, it scans how it is being said. In milliseconds, people detect warmth, threat, confidence, or insecurity through vocal cues, facial tension, and emotional energy. A calm tone can make difficult truths feel safe. A sharp or dismissive tone can turn even kind words into an attack. This happens because the nervous system listens first. It asks a simple question: am I safe or am I threatened? Tone answers that question long before meaning does. This is why arguments escalate even when people say the right things. The words may be reasonable, but the tone signals judgment, impatience, or superiority. Once someone feels emotionally threatened, their ability to hear your message collapses. Logic cannot compete with emotional alarm. Tone also reveals what words try to hide. Someone can say they care, but a cold or irritated tone exposes indifference. Someone can say they are confident, but a hesitant tone communicates doubt. People trust tone because it feels harder to fake. It feels honest. This lesson explains why some people are persuasive without being articulate, while others are ignored despite strong arguments. Tone creates the emotional frame through which words are interpreted. When your tone aligns with safety, respect, and calm authority, people listen. When it doesn't, your message never truly arrives. People remember how you made them feel, not what you explained. This lesson reveals that memory is emotional before it is factual. The human brain does not store interactions like recordings. It stores them as emotional impressions. Long after the details fade, the nervous system remembers whether an interaction felt safe, humiliating, validating, or dismissive. Explanations disappear, feelings remain. When someone walks away from a conversation, they rarely replay your logic. They replay the emotional state you left them in. Did they feel respected or small, heard or ignored, calm or tense? Those sensations become the story they associate with you. Over time, that emotional memory defines trust, attraction, and distance. This is why people forgive poor explanations, but not emotional harm. You can be unclear and still be remembered fondly if you made someone feel valued. You can be right and still be remembered negatively if you made someone feel embarrassed or dismissed. Emotional impact outweighs intellectual accuracy. The brain prioritizes emotions because they signal meaning and safety. Facts inform, but feelings guide behavior. If someone feels threatened, they disengage. If they feel understood, they open up. This happens even when they can't explain why. Understanding this lesson changes how influence works. It's not about saying more or explaining better. It's about emotional awareness. When you manage how someone feels in your presence, you shape how they remember you. And that memory, not your explanation, determines whether they listen to you again. Confidence is often mistaken for competence. This lesson exposes a bias deeply rooted in human perception. The brain uses confidence as a shortcut for ability. When someone speaks clearly, moves decisively, and shows little hesitation, people instinctively assume they know what they're doing. Confidence creates the appearance of control, and control feels reassuring, especially in uncertain situations. The mind prefers certainty over accuracy. A confident answer feels safer than a careful one, even when it's wrong. This is why bold claims are often rewarded more than thoughtful insight. Hesitation is misread as weakness, while certainty is mistaken for expertise. The performance becomes more convincing than the substance. This dynamic thrives in environments driven by pressure and speed. In workplaces, social groups, and leadership roles, those who project certainty are trusted faster, promoted sooner, and followed more willingly. Meanwhile, quieter competence often goes unnoticed because it doesn't demand attention. Confidence also influences self-perception. People begin to trust confident individuals simply because others do. Social proof amplifies the illusion, creating authority where none may exist. Over time, this reinforces the pattern, allowing confidence to outrun actual skill. The emotional impact of this lesson is unsettling. It explains why unqualified people rise while capable ones doubt themselves. It also reveals how easily perception can override reality. When confidence is rewarded more than competence, the loudest voice often leads, regardless of where it's actually taking everyone. People judge you within seconds, then spend months justifying that judgment. This lesson exposes how fast and unforgiving the human mind can be. Within moments of meeting you, people form an impression based on posture, facial expression, tone, confidence, and subtle social cues. This judgment feels instinctive, almost automatic, and once it forms, it becomes a mental anchor. After that initial impression, logic stops being neutral. The brain shifts into confirmation mode. People unconsciously search for evidence that proves their first judgment was correct. If they decided you were confident, they notice your strengths. If they decided you were arrogant, they notice every flaw. The same behavior can be interpreted in opposite ways depending on that first conclusion. This happens because changing one's mind is psychologically uncomfortable. Admitting a wrong judgment feels like admitting poor perception, poor intelligence, or poor intuition. To avoid that discomfort, the mind rewrites reality. Contradictory evidence is ignored, minimized, or rationalized away. This is why first impressions carry so much weight and why reputation is hard to change. It's not that people don't see new information, it's that they reinterpret it to fit their existing narrative. Once a story is formed, it becomes self-reinforcing. Understanding this lesson reveals why you can do everything right and still be misunderstood. It also explains why early moments matter disproportionately. The brain wants certainty, not accuracy, and once it finds a conclusion, it defends it fiercely, often long after it stops being true. Loneliness can exist even when you're surrounded by people. This lesson reveals that loneliness is not the absence of people, but the absence of emotional connection. You can be in a crowded room, laughing, talking, and engaging, yet feel deeply unseen. The mind doesn't measure connection by proximity, it measures it by understanding. When that understanding is missing, isolation can feel even sharper. Social interaction without emotional resonance often intensifies loneliness rather than easing it. When conversations stay surface level or feel performative, the gap between who you are and what you show grows wider. You begin to feel like an observer inside your own life, present but not truly involved. The brain craves being known, not just acknowledged. When people respond to a version of you that feels edited or incomplete, the nervous system registers disconnection. This creates a quiet ache that doesn't disappear with noise or company. In fact, being around others can amplify the feeling because it highlights what's missing. Many people stay busy to avoid this realization. They surround themselves with social activity to drown out the discomfort, mistaking stimulation for connection. But once the room empties, the loneliness remains heavier than before. This lesson explains why some of the most socially active people feel the most alone. Without emotional safety, vulnerability, and mutual understanding, relationships become hollow. Loneliness isn't cured by being around people. It's eased when someone feels genuinely seen, accepted, and emotionally met. Many arguments are really about ego, not facts. This lesson exposes why so many debates go nowhere. On the surface, people argue about ideas, opinions, or details, but underneath, the real conflict is about identity. Ego ties beliefs to self-worth. When a belief is challenged, the mind experiences it as a personal attack, not an exchange of information. Once ego is activated, the goal of the argument shifts. It is no longer about discovering truth or understanding the other side. It becomes about defending status, intelligence, and control. Winning feels more important than being accurate. Admitting uncertainty feels like weakness. Changing one's mind feels like losing. This is why evidence often intensifies resistance instead of resolving it. Facts threaten ego, so the brain rejects them, rationalizes them away, or attacks the source. People interrupt, raise their voice, or shift the topic because the nervous system is trying to regain dominance and emotional safety. Ego-driven arguments are emotionally charged because they are rooted in fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of looking foolish, fear of losing respect. These fears operate silently, shaping tone, posture, and reaction long before logic enters the room. When you recognize this pattern, arguments become easier to understand. You stop trying to overpower people with facts and start noticing what is actually at stake for them emotionally. Once ego feels safe, facts can be heard. Until then, no amount of reasoning will reach someone who is fighting to protect who they believe they are. People don't change until staying the same hurts more than changing. This lesson reveals a hard truth about human behavior. Pain is a stronger motivator than awareness. Most people know what they should change long before they actually do. They recognize unhealthy habits, toxic relationships, and self-destructive patterns, yet continue repeating them because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. The brain clings to what it knows, even when it hurts. Change threatens identity, routine, and control. It forces the mind into the unknown, where outcomes are unpredictable. Staying the same may be painful, but it is predictable pain. The nervous system prefers predictable suffering over unfamiliar risk. As long as the pain is tolerable, change feels unnecessary. This is why advice rarely works. Understanding a problem does not create movement. Discomfort does. Only when the emotional cost of staying the same becomes unbearable does the brain allow change to feel like relief instead of danger. Rock bottom is not about hitting a specific low, but about crossing a personal threshold where denial collapses. The moment pain outweighs fear, motivation appears. Suddenly, the effort required to change feels smaller than the suffering required to stay stuck. What once felt impossible now feels necessary. This lesson explains why people delay growth for years, then change rapidly after a breakup, loss, or failure. It's not lack of knowledge that holds them back. It's the absence of enough pain to make staying the same feel intolerable. Silence makes insecure people uncomfortable. This lesson exposes how deeply insecurity depends on constant feedback. Silence removes reassurance, and without reassurance, the mind fills the gap with fear. When nothing is said, insecure people don't experience calm neutrality. They experience uncertainty, and uncertainty quickly turns into imagined judgment. The brain searches for meaning in the absence of information. Silence becomes interpreted as rejection, disapproval, or threat. Instead of seeing quiet as space, the insecure mind sees it as a signal that something is wrong. This is why silence often provokes anxiety, overthinking, and impulsive behavior. Insecure people rely on external validation to regulate their emotions. Conversation, reactions, and responses act as proof that they are accepted and valued. When silence appears, that proof disappears. The nervous system activates, pushing them to talk, explain, justify, or seek reassurance, even when none is needed. This is why some people feel compelled to fill every pause, overshare, or create conflict out of nothing. Silence feels like losing control. It forces them to sit with their own thoughts, and those thoughts are often critical, fearful, or self-doubting. Confident people experience silence differently. They see it as neutral or even grounding. Insecurity turns silence into a mirror, reflecting unresolved fears and unmet emotional needs. The discomfort isn't caused by the quiet itself, but by what the quiet allows them to hear inside their own mind. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. This lesson exposes a silent language people speak without words. Every time you allow disrespect, inconsistency, or disregard to pass without response, you are communicating permission. The brain of the other person registers patterns, not intentions. What happens repeatedly becomes the standard, not the exception. Most people don't push boundaries because they are malicious. They push because they are learning. Human behavior adapts to feedback, and silence is feedback. When there are no consequences, the behavior is unconsciously reinforced. Over time, what once felt uncomfortable becomes normalized, both for them and for you. Tolerating poor treatment often comes from fear of conflict, abandonment, or being seen as difficult. But avoidance carries a cost. Each time you suppress a reaction, resentment quietly builds. The nervous system remembers every moment you betrayed your own discomfort to keep the peace. Eventually, People stop seeing the line because the line was never enforced. They don't feel like they are doing something wrong because nothing ever told them they were. This creates a dynamic where respect erodes slowly, not through one big moment, but through countless small allowances. Understanding this lesson shifts responsibility back where it belongs. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about teaching others what access to you requires. What you tolerate becomes your reality, and what you consistently address becomes your protection. Most people listen to reply, not to understand. This lesson reveals a hidden habit that quietly destroys real connection. When most people appear to be listening, their attention is not on your meaning, but on their next response. Their mind is busy rehearsing, judging, or defending instead of absorbing what is being said. Listening becomes a pause between statements, not an act of understanding. This happens because listening deeply requires vulnerability. To truly understand someone, you must momentarily set aside your own perspective, and that feels risky. The ego resists silence because silence removes control. Responding quickly restores it. A reply feels like power. Understanding feels like exposure. As a result, conversations turn into parallel monologues. People wait for openings, interrupt subtly, or steer the discussion back to themselves. They respond to what they assume you mean, not to what you actually said. Over time, this creates the feeling of being unheard, even when words are exchanged constantly. The brain favors speed over depth. Forming a reply gives the nervous system something to hold on to. Slowing down to truly listen forces the mind to sit with uncertainty, emotion, and perspectives that may challenge its own. This is why being truly listened to feels rare and intimate. When someone listens to understand, it creates psychological safety. The body relaxes, defenses drop, trust forms. Most people don't realize they are missing this skill, yet it is the very thing that separates surface conversation from genuine connection and influence. Being busy is often an escape from dealing with yourself. This lesson exposes how productivity can quietly become a form of avoidance. Staying busy creates the illusion of progress while keeping the mind distracted from uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. When every moment is filled with tasks, noise, and responsibility, there is little space left for self-reflection. Silence becomes threatening because it forces awareness. The brain uses busyness as a shield. Unresolved emotions, insecurities, and unanswered questions surface most clearly when there is nothing to distract from them. By staying constantly occupied, people delay confronting dissatisfaction, loneliness, or fear. Movement feels safer than stillness, even when that movement leads nowhere meaningful. Culturally, busyness is rewarded. Being overwhelmed is praised as dedication, ambition, and discipline. This makes avoidance socially acceptable, even admirable. People rarely question whether constant activity is driven by purpose or by discomfort with being alone with their thoughts. Over time, this pattern creates emotional exhaustion. The body keeps moving, but the mind remains unresolved. Rest feels uncomfortable, not refreshing. When everything slows down, anxiety appears, revealing what busyness was covering. This lesson becomes emotional when you realize that productivity does not equal fulfillment. You can achieve, succeed, and stay occupied while remaining disconnected from yourself. Until someone is willing to sit in stillness and face what they've been avoiding, being busy will continue to feel productive while quietly keeping real growth out of reach. People project their insecurities onto others without realizing it. This lesson reveals how the mind protects itself from emotional discomfort. Insecurity is painful to acknowledge, so the brain looks for somewhere else to place it. Instead of confronting inner doubt, fear, or shame, people unconsciously assign those feelings to others. What they criticize externally often exists internally. Projection happens automatically. Someone who feels inadequate may accuse others of arrogance. Someone who fears rejection may see disloyalty everywhere. Someone uncomfortable with their own flaws becomes hyper-aware of those same flaws in others. The mind feels relief when the problem appears to exist outside the self. This is why certain comments feel oddly specific or emotionally charged. They aren't really about you. They are emotional leaks. The reaction is disproportionate because it's fueled by unresolved inner tension. The person isn't responding to the situation in front of them, but to a story they carry inside. Projection also distorts perception. People genuinely believe their interpretations are objective. They don't realize their lens is colored by personal fear or shame. To them, their judgment feels like truth, not defense. Understanding this lesson changes how criticism feels. You stop taking every accusation personally. You begin to recognize that emotional reactions often reveal more about the speaker than the target. What someone projects onto you is frequently the part of themselves they are unable or unwilling to face. Your brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. This lesson reveals a survival bias that quietly shapes most human behavior. The brain is designed to prioritize predictability, not happiness. Familiar pain feels controllable because it is known. Even when it hurts, it comes with expectations. Unfamiliar peace, on the other hand, is uncertain, and uncertainty signals risk to the nervous system. This is why people stay in toxic relationships, unfulfilling jobs, and destructive habits long after they recognize the damage. The pain is routine. The brain has learned how to survive it. Peace would require new rules, new behaviors, and the possibility of new failure. That unknown feels more dangerous than suffering you can anticipate. Familiar pain offers a twisted sense of safety. It confirms the stories people tell themselves about who they are and what they deserve. Breaking free would force the brain to rewrite those stories, and identity change feels threatening, even when the new identity is healthier. The nervous system confuses calm with emptiness when chaos has been the norm. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stability feels boring. Without realizing it, people recreate stress just to feel grounded again. This lesson explains why healing feels unsettling at first. Growth disrupts patterns the brain relies on for survival. Until peace becomes familiar, the mind will resist it. What feels like self-sabotage is often the brain desperately trying to stay in territory it knows how to endure. Emotional reactions usually reveal unresolved wounds. This lesson points to a truth most people avoid because it forces self-examination. Intense emotional reactions are rarely about the present moment. They are echoes of past experiences that were never fully processed. When a reaction feels disproportionate, sudden, or uncontrollable, it is often an old wound being touched, not a new threat being created. The nervous system stores emotional memory differently than logical memory. Even when the mind forgets, the body remembers. A tone of voice, a look, or a situation can activate feelings that were learned during moments of rejection, abandonment, shame, or fear. The reaction happens fast because it is protective, not rational. This is why small comments can trigger anger, withdrawal, or panic. The present situation becomes a stand-in for an earlier experience where the person felt powerless or unsafe. The emotion feels urgent because the brain believes it is reliving something unresolved. People often blame others for these reactions because it feels easier than looking inward. Acknowledging a wound requires vulnerability and accountability. It means admitting that the pain didn't start here and that it still holds influence. Understanding this lesson shifts how you interpret emotional intensity, both in yourself and others. Instead of seeing overreactions as weakness or drama, you begin to recognize them as signals that something inside hasn't healed yet. Until those wounds are acknowledged, emotions will continue to surface in moments that seem illogical but feel painfully real. People value what they work for more than what they're given. This lesson reveals how effort shapes attachment. When people invest time, energy, and struggle into something, it becomes emotionally charged. The effort creates meaning. The mind links value to sacrifice, interpreting what required work as something worth protecting. What comes easily is often taken lightly, not because it lacks worth, but because it lacks emotional investment. The brain justifies effort by increasing perceived value. If something costs nothing, losing it feels insignificant. But when effort is involved, letting go feels like wasting a part of oneself. This is why people defend relationships, goals, and identities they have suffered for, even when those things no longer serve them. This principle explains why earned respect feels deeper than given praise, and why achievements feel hollow when they come without struggle. Effort creates ownership. Ownership creates attachment. Attachment creates meaning. Emotionally, this lesson can be uncomfortable. It explains why people overlook generosity, ignore opportunities handed to them, and only appreciate what they almost lost. It also reveals why people sometimes cling to hardship, confusing struggle with value. Understanding this shifts how you give and receive. It shows why saving someone from their own effort can rob them of appreciation. Value grows where effort lives, and without effort, even the most meaningful things can feel replaceable. Over-explaining often makes you look less trustworthy. This lesson reveals a paradox in human communication. The more you try to prove yourself, the more doubt you create. Over-explaining doesn't signal clarity, it signals anxiety. When someone adds excessive detail, justification, or repetition, the listener subconsciously wonders why reassurance is needed in the first place. The brain is highly sensitive to confidence cues. People trust information that is delivered calmly and concisely because it suggests certainty. Over-explaining feels like self-defense, not self-assurance. It creates the impression that you are trying to control perception rather than simply state the truth. This happens because insecurity pushes people to anticipate judgment. They explain every angle to prevent misunderstanding, rejection, or criticism. But in doing so, they unintentionally communicate fear of being questioned. The listener doesn't hear confidence. They hear hesitation beneath the words. Over-explaining also overwhelms the emotional processing of the listener. Too much information triggers skepticism and fatigue. Instead of feeling informed, people feel managed. The message loses its natural authority. Trust is built through clarity, not volume. When words are measured, they feel deliberate. When explanations are endless, they feel defensive. This is why confident people can say less and be believed more. Over-explaining isn't about helping others understand. It's often about trying to ease internal doubt, and that doubt quietly leaks into how others perceive you. Being nice is not the same as being kind. This lesson exposes a confusion that shapes many unhealthy relationships. Niceness is often driven by fear, while kindness is driven by care. Nice behavior aims to avoid discomfort, conflict, or rejection. Kind behavior aims to do what is honest, supportive, and ultimately helpful, even when it feels uncomfortable. People who are nice often suppress their true thoughts, agree when they don't mean it, and prioritize harmony at the cost of truth. This creates a surface-level peace that feels safe in the moment, but slowly erodes trust. When niceness replaces honesty, relationships become fragile, built on what is hidden rather than what is real. Kindness, by contrast, requires courage. It may involve setting boundaries, giving difficult feedback, or saying no when yes would be easier. Kindness considers long-term impact, not short-term comfort. It respects both the other person and the self. The brain often rewards niceness because it reduces immediate social tension. Kindness doesn't offer that instant relief. It can create temporary discomfort, misunderstandings, or disappointment. But over time, kindness builds respect and emotional safety. This lesson explains why nice people often feel drained and unseen, while kind people feel grounded even when relationships are challenged. Niceness avoids pain. Kindness transforms it. And only one of them leads to relationships that are honest, stable, and emotionally real. The need for approval can quietly ruin your life. This lesson exposes one of the most socially rewarded yet personally destructive patterns in human behavior. The need for approval often disguises itself as kindness, cooperation, or being easy to get along with. On the surface, it looks harmless. Beneath it, it slowly erodes autonomy, self-trust, and identity. Approval feels like safety. When others validate you, the nervous system relaxes. When they don't, anxiety rises. Over time, this teaches the brain to outsource worth. Decisions stop being guided by internal values and start being filtered through the question of how they will be received. What pleases others begins to matter more than what feels right. This pattern doesn't destroy life loudly. It does it quietly, through small compromises, through unspoken resentment, through staying silent when boundaries are crossed. Each moment of self-betrayal feels insignificant, but they accumulate into a life that feels constrained and inauthentic. The fear driving this need is not disapproval itself, but the imagined consequences of it. Rejection, conflict, abandonment. To avoid those outcomes, people shapeshift, overextend, and suppress discomfort. The cost is delayed, but inevitable. Eventually, approval-seeking creates exhaustion and emptiness. You may be liked, but not known, accepted, but not aligned. And the most painful realization arrives slowly. When your sense of worth depends on others, your life is no longer fully yours. People rarely apologize unless it benefits them socially or emotionally. This lesson exposes how apologies are often driven less by accountability and more by self-preservation. A genuine apology requires someone to sit with guilt, admit fault, and risk lowering their status in the eyes of others. For most people, that emotional cost feels threatening. The brain resists anything that might damage self-image or social standing. Instead of apologizing, people justify, minimize, or shift blame. These defenses protect identity and reduce internal discomfort. An apology only becomes possible when it offers something in return: relief from guilt, restoration of a relationship, public approval, or avoidance of consequences. Without a clear emotional or social payoff, silence feels safer. This is why apologies often arrive late, after damage has been done, or framed in ways that soften responsibility. "I'm sorry you felt that way" preserves self-esteem while appearing remorseful. The goal is not repair, but emotional escape. The emotional weight of this lesson is heavy because it explains why closure is rare. Many people would rather be seen as right than be seen as human. Admitting wrongdoing threatens the story they tell themselves about who they are. When an apology does come without benefit, without pressure, reward, or leverage, it stands out because it is rare. It signals emotional maturity and self-security. Most apologies, however, are transactions, offered only when the cost of not apologizing becomes higher than the cost of owning the truth. Your mind will believe a lie if you repeat it enough times. This lesson exposes how fragile perception really is. The brain does not prioritize truth, it prioritizes familiarity. When a thought is repeated, the mind begins to treat it as reliable, not because it's accurate, but because it feels known. Repetition creates a sense of safety, and safety is often mistaken for truth. Each time a lie is repeated, resistance weakens. At first, the thought feels false or uncomfortable. Over time, it becomes neutral. Eventually, it starts to feel natural. The brain stops questioning what it hears most often and starts accepting it as part of reality. Familiarity lowers skepticism. This is why negative self-talk is so dangerous. Telling yourself you're not good enough, not capable, or not worthy doesn't just hurt emotionally, it reshapes belief. The mind absorbs the message and adjusts behavior to match it. A repeated thought becomes an identity. This mechanism doesn't only apply internally. It's why propaganda, manipulation, and social conditioning work so well. The brain confuses repetition with evidence. What is heard often feels true, even when logic says otherwise. Understanding this lesson forces awareness. The thoughts you allow to loop in your mind are not harmless. They are instructions. Whether empowering or destructive, the mind listens to what it hears the most. Over time, repetition doesn't just influence belief, it becomes belief. Attraction often has more to do with timing than compatibility. This lesson reveals why people can feel intensely drawn to someone who is objectively wrong for them, while feeling nothing for someone who seems perfect on paper. Attraction is not a logical evaluation of traits. It is an emotional response shaped by readiness, wounds, and unmet needs at a specific moment in time. Timing determines whether someone feels exciting or invisible. If a person enters your life when you are emotionally unavailable, overwhelmed, or healing, even strong compatibility can go unnoticed. When someone appears during a period of loneliness, uncertainty, or transition, the connection can feel magnetic, regardless of long-term fit. The brain is especially drawn to people who match its current emotional state. Familiar patterns feel attractive because they resonate with unresolved experiences. What feels like chemistry is often recognition. It's the nervous system responding to something it knows, not necessarily something that is healthy. This is why attraction can fade without explanation once circumstances change. When emotional needs shift, the same person can suddenly feel distant or wrong. Nothing about them changed. Timing did. Understanding this lesson helps dissolve confusion and self-blame. Attraction is not always a sign of destiny or deep compatibility. It is often a reflection of where someone is emotionally when paths cross. Timing decides the intensity, even when compatibility determines the outcome. People fear rejection more than failure. This lesson reveals a deep social truth rooted in survival psychology. Failure is painful, but rejection threatens something more fundamental: belonging. The human brain evolved to treat exclusion as danger because, historically, being rejected by the group meant vulnerability and loss of protection. That wiring still exists, even when the stakes are no longer life or death. Failure can be private. Rejection feels personal. When you fail, you can blame circumstances, timing, or lack of experience. When you are rejected, the mind interprets it as a judgment of your worth. It feels like being seen and dismissed. That emotional exposure is what people try to avoid. This fear shapes behavior quietly. People don't apply, don't confess, don't ask, and don't try, not because they believe they will fail, but because they fear being turned away. Silence feels safer than hearing no. Inaction feels protective because it avoids the risk of emotional pain. Rejection activates shame, which is one of the most powerful emotional inhibitors. It tells the brain to hide, withdraw, and minimize. Failure, by contrast, can still preserve dignity. You can fail without feeling unwanted. Understanding this lesson explains why so many people live below their potential. They would rather stay comfortable in what they know than risk the emotional sting of not being chosen. Rejection isn't feared because it ends opportunities, but because it forces people to confront the possibility that they might not be enough. Most people aren't against you. They're just for themselves. This lesson dismantles the assumption that others are constantly judging, opposing, or intentionally undermining you. In reality, most people are absorbed in their own concerns, fears, and priorities. Their actions are guided less by malice and more by self-interest. What feels personal is often incidental. The human mind is wired for survival, not fairness. People make decisions based on what benefits them emotionally, socially, or materially in the moment. When their needs conflict with yours, it can feel like betrayal or hostility, but it is usually indifference rather than intent. They are not thinking about how their choices affect you. they are thinking about how those choices affect them. This explains why support can disappear when it becomes inconvenient and why loyalty often has conditions. People help when it aligns with their identity or benefits their position. When it doesn't, distance appears, not because they wish you harm, but because you are no longer central to their priorities. Emotionally, this lesson can sting because it challenges the desire to feel significant in others' lives. It forces the realization that you occupy far less mental space than you imagine. Yet there is relief in this truth. When you stop assuming opposition, you stop carrying unnecessary weight. Understanding that most people are simply navigating their own world allows you to take things less personally and protect your energy more intentionally. Compliments feel better when they confirm what we already believe. This lesson reveals that praise is filtered through self-perception, not generosity. A compliment doesn't land based on how kind it is, but on how familiar it feels. When praise aligns with an existing belief about the self, it feels true. When it doesn't, it feels awkward, suspicious, or easily dismissed. The brain resists information that contradicts identity, even when it's positive. If someone believes they're intelligent, being called smart feels validating and powerful. If they secretly believe they're inadequate, the same compliment feels uncomfortable or undeserved. The praise clashes with the internal narrative, so the mind rejects it. This is why people often brush off compliments they deeply need. It's not humility, it's incongruence. Accepting the praise would require updating their self-image, and that feels destabilizing. Familiar self-beliefs, even painful ones, feel safer than unfamiliar positivity. Compliments act like mirrors. They reflect what already exists internally. When the reflection matches, it feels affirming. When it doesn't, it creates tension. This is also why targeted compliments feel stronger than generic ones. Specific praise signals recognition, not politeness. Understanding this lesson explains why external validation has limits. Praise cannot override identity. Until someone changes what they believe about themselves, compliments will only be as powerful as the beliefs they reinforce. Criticism hurts more when it's true. This lesson reveals why certain words linger long after they are spoken. When criticism touches something accurate, it bypasses logic and strikes identity. The pain doesn't come from the other person's opinion, but from recognition. Part of you already knows it, even if you've tried not to look at it directly. The brain reacts strongly because truth threatens self-image. We all carry a mental picture of who we believe we are, and true criticism cracks that image. It forces awareness where avoidance once lived. Defensive reactions rise not to reject the criticism, but to protect the ego from collapsing under it. False criticism is easier to dismiss. It feels foreign and disconnected. True criticism feels personal because it aligns with private doubts and insecurities. The nervous system responds with shame, anger, or withdrawal because exposure feels dangerous. This is why the same words can feel harmless from one person and devastating from another. When someone names something you've silently judged yourself for, it feels like being seen without consent. The discomfort comes from losing the illusion that it was hidden. Understanding this lesson changes how you respond to criticism. Pain becomes a signal rather than an enemy. The intensity of the reaction often reveals where growth is needed. What hurts most is often pointing towards something unresolved, waiting for honesty, attention, and change. People remember insults longer than praise. This lesson exposes a bias built deep into the human brain. Negative experiences imprint more strongly than positive ones because the mind is designed to prioritize threat over comfort. Praise feels good in the moment, but insults trigger alertness, self-doubt, and vigilance. The brain holds onto them as a form of protection. An insult doesn't just pass through awareness, it invites interpretation. People replay it, analyze it, and connect it to existing insecurities. Even a careless comment can echo for years because it reinforces a fear someone already carries about themselves. Praise, by contrast, is often dismissed, rationalized, or forgotten because it doesn't demand survival attention. This is why one negative remark can outweigh 10 compliments. The nervous system flags the insult as important information. It asks, "What does this say about me? What do others see that I don't?" The emotional charge keeps the memory alive. Insults also feel more credible than praise. Compliments can be perceived as polite, exaggerated, or self-serving. Criticism feels raw and unfiltered, even when it's unfair. The brain mistakes harshness for honesty. Over time, remembered insults shape self-image. They influence confidence, choices, and boundaries. People may forget who praised them, but they remember who made them feel small. Not because the insult was true, but because the brain was never designed to let go of what once felt like a threat. Your habits shape your personality more than your intentions. This lesson reveals how identity is built through repetition, not desire. People like to believe they are defined by what they mean to do, but the brain doesn't operate on intention. It operates on patterns. What you repeatedly do trains your nervous system, shapes your reactions, and quietly becomes who you are. Intentions live in the mind, but habits live in the body. You can intend to be calm, disciplined, confident, or kind, yet your habits determine whether those traits actually exist under pressure. In moments of stress, the brain does not consult your goals. It defaults to what is familiar. That familiarity is built through habit. Over time, repeated behaviors carve emotional pathways. Avoidance becomes anxiety. Procrastination becomes self-doubt. Consistency becomes self-trust. The personality people see is not your potential, but your practiced responses. This is why change feels so hard. You're not just changing actions, you're challenging an identity reinforced daily. The emotional weight of this lesson comes from realizing how powerless good intentions are without structure. Wanting to be better does not rewrite behavior. Repetition does. Small, unnoticed habits quietly shape confidence, self-respect, and resilience. This lesson is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It shows that who you are becoming is less about what you hope for and more about what you repeatedly allow. Personality is not chosen once. It is built daily through habits that either support or sabotage the person you think you are. Confidence grows when you keep promises to yourself. This lesson reveals that confidence is not a personality trait, but a relationship. It's the relationship you have with your own word. Every promise you make to yourself creates an internal contract, and every time you break it, trust erodes quietly. The damage isn't loud, but it accumulates. The mind is always watching behavior. When you say you'll do something and don't, the brain records it as evidence. Over time, it learns that your intentions are unreliable. This creates hesitation, self-doubt, and a subtle lack of self-respect. Confidence cannot grow in an environment where your own word doesn't feel safe. Keeping promises to yourself does the opposite. Each follow-through reinforces the belief that you can be trusted. This builds internal stability. The mind stops questioning whether you'll show up because experience has proven that you will. Confidence emerges naturally from consistency, not motivation. This is why small commitments matter more than dramatic goals. Waking up when you said you would, finishing what you started, honoring boundaries you set, these moments quietly shape identity. The brain equates action with credibility. Confidence isn't built by positive thinking or external praise. It's built through evidence. When your actions align with your intentions, your nervous system relaxes. You stop needing validation because you've already proven something more powerful to yourself, that your word has weight and you can rely on it. People assume your silence means agreement. This lesson reveals how silence is rarely interpreted as neutrality. In social and psychological dynamics, silence is often read as consent. When you don't speak up, correct, or object, others fill the gap with their own assumptions, usually in a way that benefits them. The absence of resistance feels like validation. The brain looks for signals to guide behavior. When there is no pushback, it assumes alignment. People move forward believing they are understood, supported, or justified, even if your silence came from discomfort, fear, or exhaustion. Intent doesn't matter as much as perception. Many people stay silent to avoid conflict or appearing difficult. But silence doesn't pause the situation. It quietly shapes it. Each unchallenged moment reinforces expectations and patterns. Over time, those expectations harden into beliefs about what you accept and who you are. This creates a dangerous disconnect. Inside, resentment builds. Outside, others believe everything is fine. When you finally speak, it feels sudden to them and overdue to you. The emotional gap widens because the conversation should have happened much earlier. Understanding this lesson reframes silence as communication, not absence. Whether you intend it or not, silence sends a message. And once a message is sent repeatedly, people stop questioning it. They assume agreement, and they act accordingly. Being emotionally unavailable often feels safer than being vulnerable. This lesson reveals how protection can quietly turn into isolation. Emotional unavailability is rarely a lack of feeling, it is a learned defense. When vulnerability has previously led to rejection, disappointment, or loss, the nervous system adapts by closing off. Distance begins to feel like control, and control feels like safety. Vulnerability requires exposure. It means allowing someone access to parts of you that can be hurt. For a brain that has learned pain through closeness, openness feels dangerous. Emotional walls form not because someone doesn't want connection, but because they fear what connection can cost. Being emotionally unavailable reduces risk. There is less to lose, less to explain, less to grieve. You can remain composed, independent, and unaffected. On the surface, this looks like strength. Internally, it often masks hypervigilance and unresolved fear. The problem is that safety without connection slowly becomes emptiness. Relationships stay shallow. Intimacy feels uncomfortable. When someone gets close, the urge to withdraw appears automatically, as if closeness itself is a threat. This pattern is reinforced because it works in the short term. Avoidance prevents immediate pain, but over time, it blocks fulfillment. Emotional unavailability protects you from being hurt, but it also protects you from being deeply known. The brain chooses what feels safer now, even if it quietly trades away the possibility of genuine connection later. We forgive others faster than we forgive ourselves. This lesson reveals a quiet imbalance in how people assign blame and compassion. When others make mistakes, we can explain their behavior through stress, ignorance, or circumstance. We soften the story to protect the relationship. But when we fail, the explanation turns inward and becomes personal. The mistake stops being something we did and becomes something we are. The mind holds on to self-blame because it feels like control. If the failure was your fault, then punishing yourself feels like accountability. Letting go feels dangerous, as if forgiveness means excusing the behavior or risking repetition. So the brain replays the moment, dissecting it endlessly, believing that suffering is the price of growth. Emotionally, this creates a loop of shame. While others are allowed to move forward, you remain trapped in an earlier version of yourself. The memory stays vivid, not because it matters, but because it hurts. Pain keeps it alive. Self-forgiveness threatens the identity built around regret, so the mind resists it. This lesson becomes heavy when you realize how long people carry mistakes that no one else remembers. The world moves on, but internally, the punishment continues. Forgiving yourself requires releasing the belief that pain equals responsibility. Until that belief is questioned, self-judgment feels safer than self-compassion, even when it quietly erodes confidence, peace, and growth. People notice changes in you more when they benefit from the old version. This lesson exposes how perception is tied to self-interest. Change is rarely judged in isolation. It's judged by how it affects others. When someone benefited from your previous behavior, your growth feels like a loss to them. The change isn't threatening because it's wrong, but because it removes access. People rarely object to your evolution when it doesn't inconvenience them. But the moment you set boundaries, speak up, or stop overgiving, the shift becomes highly visible. What once went unnoticed suddenly feels dramatic. The old version was predictable, accommodating, and easy to rely on. The brain resists losing advantage. When expectations are disrupted, discomfort appears. People frame this discomfort as concern, criticism, or confusion, but underneath it is often entitlement. They were comfortable with who you were when it worked for them. This is why growth can feel isolating. The versions of you that required self-sacrifice were rewarded. The versions that protect peace are questioned. People call it change, attitude, or distance, but it's really autonomy. Understanding this lesson removes guilt. Not all resistance means you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're doing something different. When people react strongly to your change, it's often a signal that your growth has altered a dynamic that once benefited them more than it benefited you. The brain is better at avoiding pain than pursuing happiness. This lesson exposes a fundamental priority built into human survival. The brain evolved to keep you alive, not fulfilled. Pain signals threat, and threats demand immediate attention. Happiness, by contrast, is not urgent. It can wait. As a result, the mind becomes highly skilled at spotting danger while remaining indifferent to joy. Avoiding pain feels productive because it creates relief. The absence of discomfort is mistaken for well-being. People choose safety over satisfaction, predictability over excitement, and familiarity over growth because the brain rewards reduction of threat more than expansion of pleasure. This is why people often sabotage opportunities that could make them happy. New possibilities come with uncertainty, and uncertainty activates fear. Even positive change contains risk, and risk feels like danger to the nervous system. The brain responds by pulling you back toward what is known, even if it is limiting. Happiness requires sustained effort, vulnerability, and tolerance of discomfort. Pain avoidance requires only retreat. One expands you, the other protects you. The brain prefers protection. Understanding this lesson explains why growth feels exhausting and avoidance feels comforting. It's not weakness, it's wiring. But when pain avoidance becomes the guiding force, life slowly shrinks. Happiness isn't pursued because it's hard. It's ignored because it doesn't feel necessary for survival, even when it's necessary for meaning. People fear being judged while constantly judging others. This lesson exposes a psychological contradiction most people live with unconsciously. The fear of being judged is intense because judgment threatens self-worth, belonging, and social safety. Yet the same mind that dreads scrutiny constantly evaluates others, often without awareness. This isn't hypocrisy by choice, but by design. Judging others gives the ego a sense of control. By labeling, comparing, and criticizing, the mind creates distance from its own insecurities. If someone else is flawed, wrong, or inferior, the self feels temporarily protected. Judgment becomes a defense mechanism, not a moral stance. At the same time, people assume they are being judged as harshly as they judge others. This projection fuels anxiety and self-consciousness. The mind expects the same internal scrutiny from the outside world, even though most people are too absorbed in their own thoughts to notice. This cycle creates tension. People censor themselves, hide parts of who they are, and perform socially acceptable versions of themselves, all while internally critiquing everyone around them. The fear isn't judgment itself, but exposure. Being seen as you truly are feels dangerous when self-acceptance is fragile. Understanding this lesson softens both sides of the experience. You realize that judgment often reveals insecurity, not superiority, and you recognize that the fear of being judged is amplified by your own inner critic. People are not as focused on you as your anxiety suggests. They are too busy managing their own fear of being seen. Nostalgia edits out the pain and keeps the comfort. This lesson reveals how memory is not a record of the past, but a story shaped by emotion. Nostalgia doesn't replay events as they were. It filters them through longing. The brain softens sharp edges, removes discomfort, and preserves only what feels warm and familiar. What once caused stress, fear, or frustration fades, while moments of connection and safety remain. The mind does this to regulate emotion. Remembering the past as gentler than it was provides comfort during uncertainty. It creates a sense of stability, a place to emotionally retreat when the present feels overwhelming. But this comfort comes at a cost. By erasing the pain, nostalgia turns old experiences into idealized versions that never truly existed. This is why people miss relationships that hurt them, long for phases of life that exhausted them, and romanticize environments they once wanted to escape. The brain remembers how it felt to belong, not how it felt to suffer. Loss sharpens affection and dulls memory of harm. Emotionally, this lesson is powerful because it explains why moving forward feels harder than looking back. The past feels safer, not because it was better, but because it's familiar and no longer demands effort. Nostalgia protects the heart from discomfort by rewriting history, keeping comfort alive while quietly hiding the reasons you had to leave in the first place. Most jealousy comes from comparison, not desire. This lesson reveals that jealousy is rarely about wanting what someone else has. It's about what their existence triggers internally. Comparison activates self-evaluation, and self-evaluation often exposes insecurity. The emotion isn't driven by longing, but by a sudden awareness of perceived lack. When people compare themselves to others, the mind creates a hierarchy. Someone else's success, beauty, confidence, or attention becomes a mirror reflecting what they believe they are missing. Jealousy emerges not because they want that exact life, but because they feel diminished by the contrast. Desire is focused and intentional. Comparison is broad and reactive. It happens automatically, often without consent. The brain scans for social position, and when it feels threatened, jealousy appears as an emotional alarm. It signals fear of being less, overlooked, or replaced. This is why jealousy can exist even when someone has no interest in what the other person actually has. The emotion fades when comparison stops, not when the object disappears. It's internal, not external. Social environments intensify this effect. Constant exposure to curated images and selective success stories keeps comparison active. The mind forgets context and only registers outcome. Jealousy then becomes chronic. Understanding this lesson shifts the response. Addressing jealousy isn't about acquiring more, it's about confronting self-worth. When comparison loses power, jealousy follows. The emotion dissolves not through possession, but through self-acceptance and internal grounding. People believe what aligns with their identity. This lesson reveals that beliefs are rarely about evidence and almost always about self-preservation. Identity is the mental structure people build to understand who they are, where they belong, and how the world makes sense. Once a belief becomes tied to that structure, questioning it feels like questioning the self. The brain protects identity the same way it protects the body. Information that supports it feels comforting and true. Information that challenges it feels threatening, regardless of accuracy. This is why people can reject facts without feeling irrational. Emotionally, they are defending who they are. Beliefs shape social belonging. They signal values, loyalty, and group membership. Changing a belief can mean risking rejection, isolation, or shame. The brain weighs that social risk and often chooses stability over truth. Alignment feels safer than accuracy. This is why debates rarely change minds. New information is filtered through identity first. If it fits, it's accepted. If it doesn't, it's dismissed, mocked, or attacked. Logic comes after emotional alignment, not before. Understanding this lesson changes how influence works. People don't need more facts, they need safety. When identity feels secure, curiosity becomes possible. Until then, belief is not a search for truth. It is a shield protecting the self from emotional and social collapse. You can outgrow people without either of you being wrong. This lesson challenges the belief that separation must mean failure, betrayal, or blame. Growth is not a moral judgment, it is a directional change. When people evolve, their values, needs, and boundaries shift. What once felt aligned can slowly become restrictive, even if nothing bad happened. Outgrowing someone often brings guilt because it disrupts familiarity. Shared history creates emotional obligation, and the mind equates distance with disloyalty. But growth doesn't ask permission. It moves according to internal change, not external agreement. Two people can be honest, kind, and well-intentioned, yet no longer fit in the same space. This is why outgrowing someone feels confusing. There may be no clear conflict to point to, only a quiet sense of misalignment. Conversations feel forced, energy feels uneven. What once flowed naturally now requires effort. The absence of wrongdoing makes the separation harder to justify emotionally. People resist this reality because it threatens the idea of permanence. Accepting that relationships can end without anyone being wrong means accepting that change is inevitable. It means letting go without a villain. Understanding this lesson reduces resentment and self-blame. It allows space for gratitude instead of bitterness. Not every ending needs an explanation rooted in fault. Sometimes, people simply grow in different directions, and honoring that truth is healthier than forcing connection to preserve the past. Anger is often a mask for fear or sadness. This lesson reveals how anger functions as emotional armor. It is loud, sharp, and outward-facing, making it easier to express than vulnerability. Fear and sadness require exposure. They admit uncertainty, loss, and helplessness. Anger, by contrast, feels powerful. It creates the illusion of control when someone feels threatened or hurt. The nervous system chooses anger because it protects. When fear arises, the body prepares for danger. When sadness appears, it signals loss or rejection. Both emotions feel unsafe to reveal, especially in environments where vulnerability has been punished or ignored. Anger steps in as a shield, redirecting pain into something that feels more acceptable and less exposing. This is why anger often flares in moments of insecurity, disappointment, or emotional neglect. It's not the root emotion, but the cover. Beneath it is usually fear of being powerless, unloved, or abandoned, or sadness over something that can't be changed. The anger distracts from the deeper wound. Emotionally, this lesson matters because it changes how conflict is understood. What looks like hostility is often unprocessed pain. When anger is met only with resistance, the underlying emotion remains unheard and intensifies. Recognizing anger as a mask doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it reveals its origin. Behind the raised voice and sharp words is often someone protecting themselves from emotions they don't feel safe enough to show. Being understood feels better than being agreed with. This lesson reveals a deep emotional truth about human connection. Agreement satisfies the mind, but understanding soothes the nervous system. When someone agrees with you, it confirms your position. When someone understands you, it validates your inner experience. That validation reaches deeper than logic. People don't crave agreement as much as they crave recognition. They want to feel seen, not corrected. Being understood tells the brain that it is safe to exist as it is, without defense or explanation. It lowers emotional guards and reduces the need to prove anything. Agreement can be empty. Someone can nod along without truly engaging. Understanding requires effort, presence, and empathy. It signals that the other person has entered your emotional world, not just your argument. That's why it feels grounding rather than exciting. This is why disagreements don't always damage relationships. Feeling dismissed does. Two people can hold opposite views and still feel close if they feel understood, but even full agreement feels hollow when someone feels unseen or misunderstood. The nervous system responds to attunement. When emotions are acknowledged, the body relaxes. When they're ignored, tension remains, regardless of shared opinions. Understanding this lesson changes how you listen. You stop aiming to win or align. You aim to reflect. And when someone feels understood, resistance fades. They no longer need agreement to feel valid because their experience has already been honored. People defend their beliefs even when evidence disproves them. This lesson reveals that belief is not a logical position, but an emotional investment. Once a belief is formed, it becomes part of how a person makes sense of the world. Letting go of it doesn't just mean accepting new information, it means admitting that past decisions, judgments, and identities may have been built on something false. The brain experiences this as loss. Being wrong threatens self-trust and stability, so it responds with defense. Evidence that contradicts a belief activates discomfort, not curiosity. Instead of reassessing, the mind looks for ways to protect itself, dismissing sources, questioning motives, or reframing facts to maintain internal consistency. This reaction is not about ignorance. It is about preservation. Beliefs provide certainty, and certainty reduces anxiety. When evidence disrupts that certainty, the nervous system prioritizes emotional safety over accuracy. This is why people can become more extreme when challenged. The pressure to defend intensifies as the belief feels increasingly threatened. Admitting error would require vulnerability, humility, and the courage to face internal contradiction. Understanding this lesson reframes stubbornness. What looks like irrational resistance is often fear of psychological collapse. Until someone feels safe enough to question themselves without losing their sense of self, evidence alone will never be enough to change what they believe. Emotional safety matters more than logic in relationships. This lesson explains why being right so often fails to bring closeness. Relationships are not governed by logic first, they are governed by the nervous system. Before someone can process reasoning, their body assesses whether it feels safe, accepted, and respected. Without emotional safety, logic sounds like criticism, even when it's accurate. Emotional safety is the feeling that you can express yourself without being shamed, dismissed, or punished. When that safety is present, people soften. They listen. They become open to feedback and perspective. When it's absent, defenses rise, and the mind prepares to protect itself rather than connect. This is why perfectly logical arguments can still damage relationships. Logic delivered without emotional attunement feels cold, superior, or invalidating. The message may make sense, but the emotional experience feels unsafe. Once someone feels threatened, the brain shifts into defense, and understanding shuts down. People don't bond over being correct. They bond over feeling understood. Validation doesn't mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. It tells the other person that their internal experience matters. When emotional safety is prioritized, difficult conversations become possible. Disagreements don't escalate as easily because the relationship itself feels secure. Logic becomes useful only after safety is established. Without it, facts lose their power and connection weakens. Emotional safety is not a luxury in relationships. It is the foundation that allows everything else to function. You can love someone and still not trust them. This lesson exposes a truth many people struggle to admit because it feels contradictory. Love is emotional attachment, care, and connection. Trust is predictability, safety, and reliability. They are related, but they are not the same. One can exist fully without the other. Love often forms quickly and deeply, driven by chemistry, shared history, or emotional bonding. Trust, however, is built slowly through consistent behavior. It depends on patterns, not promises. When someone repeatedly violates expectations, the emotional bond may remain while the sense of safety erodes. This creates internal conflict. Love pulls you toward the person, while distrust keeps you guarded. The heart wants closeness, but the nervous system stays alert. This tension is exhausting because it forces you to stay emotionally connected while constantly protecting yourself. Emotionally, this lesson is painful because it explains why leaving can feel impossible even when staying feels unsafe. Love makes people minimize broken trust, rationalize behavior, and hope for change. Trust, once damaged, doesn't respond to hope. It responds to evidence. Understanding this lesson removes confusion. It shows that love alone is not enough to sustain healthy connection. Without trust, love becomes anxiety instead of safety. Caring for someone does not obligate you to feel secure with them, and acknowledging that difference is often the first step toward emotional clarity. People want control more than freedom. This lesson reveals a contradiction at the center of human desire. Freedom sounds ideal, but control feels safer. Freedom comes with uncertainty, responsibility, and the pressure to choose. Control reduces chaos. It offers predictability, even if that predictability is limiting or painful. The brain prioritizes stability over possibility. Control gives the illusion of certainty, and certainty calms the nervous system. Freedom demands self-trust, adaptability, and tolerance for risk. For many people, that feels overwhelming. It's easier to manage known constraints than to navigate open-ended choices. This is why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that restrict them, and routines that drain them. They aren't trapped by circumstance alone. They're anchored by familiarity. Control allows people to anticipate outcomes, even negative ones. Freedom removes that guarantee. Control also feeds identity. When someone knows their role, their power, or their limits, they know who they are. Freedom threatens that clarity. It forces self-definition without structure, and that can feel destabilizing. The fear isn't failure, it's ambiguity. This lesson explains why people resist change even when change offers more options. Freedom expands responsibility. Control narrows it. The mind often chooses the smaller cage because it feels easier to manage. Understanding this dynamic reframes behavior. What looks like fear of freedom is often a need for emotional safety. Control feels protective. Freedom feels exposed. And until someone feels safe enough internally, control will always feel more attractive than possibility. The brain exaggerates threats when it lacks certainty. This lesson reveals how deeply the mind depends on predictability to feel safe. When the brain cannot clearly determine what will happen next, it fills the gap with worst-case scenarios. Uncertainty removes the sense of control, and loss of control signals danger to the nervous system, even when no real threat is present. The brain evolved to assume that the unknown could be harmful. If something is unclear, it is treated as risky by default. This is why ambiguous situations often feel more stressful than openly bad ones. Not knowing keeps the threat alive, forcing the mind to stay alert and tense. In the absence of certainty, imagination takes over. The brain scans for patterns, exaggerates potential outcomes, and prepares for impact that may never come. This creates anxiety, overthinking, and hypervigilance. The body reacts as if danger is imminent, even when the threat exists only in possibility. This is why people fear waiting, silence, and unanswered questions. The lack of information becomes the threat. Clarity, even when painful, often brings relief because it ends the mental guessing. Understanding this lesson explains why reassurance calms the nervous system so effectively. Certainty quiets fear. When the brain knows what to expect, it relaxes. When it doesn't, it assumes the worst, not because it's pessimistic, but because it is trying to protect you from what it cannot predict. Your self-talk becomes your reality over time. This lesson reveals how quietly the mind shapes lived experience. Self-talk is not just internal commentary, it is ongoing instruction. The brain absorbs repeated thoughts as truth, regardless of whether they are accurate. Over time, those thoughts influence perception, emotion, and behavior, slowly turning inner dialogue into external reality. The mind does not question repetition. When you consistently tell yourself you are behind, incapable, or unworthy, the nervous system adjusts to that narrative. It becomes more alert, more hesitant, more self-protective. Opportunities are overlooked. Risks feel dangerous, and confidence erodes, not because of circumstances, but because the internal environment has become hostile. Self-talk also shapes what you notice. The brain filters reality based on expectation. If your inner voice predicts failure, you become hyper-aware of mistakes and blind to progress. If it expects rejection, neutral interactions feel threatening. The world begins to mirror the story you tell yourself. This process is gradual, which makes it powerful. No single thought changes a life, but thousands of similar ones do. The tone of your inner voice becomes the emotional climate you live in. Changing self-talk is difficult because it feels familiar, even when it's damaging. The mind clings to known narratives because they provide predictability. But as those narratives repeat, they don't just describe reality, they create it. What you tell yourself consistently doesn't stay internal. It becomes the lens through which everything else is experienced. People notice confidence before competence. This lesson reveals how perception forms faster than reality. The human brain is designed to make quick judgments, especially in social environments where uncertainty feels threatening. Confidence signals certainty, and certainty feels safe. Before anyone evaluates skill, experience, or results, they respond to how assured someone appears in their presence. Confidence captures attention because it simplifies decision-making. A confident person seems like someone who knows where they're going, even if they don't. Competence requires time to observe and verify, but confidence is immediate. It fills the silence before evidence appears. This is why first impressions carry so much weight. People rarely get the chance to demonstrate their true ability before being judged. Those who hesitate, speak carefully, or question themselves are often overlooked, even when they are more capable. Meanwhile, confident delivery can disguise gaps in knowledge and create authority where it hasn't been earned. Emotionally, this lesson can feel discouraging. It explains why hard work goes unseen and why recognition often favors those who perform belief in themselves rather than those who quietly master their craft. It also exposes how social systems reward appearance over substance. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean abandoning competence for confidence. It means recognizing how human attention works. Until confidence opens the door, competence may never get the chance to walk in. Avoidance strengthens fear. This lesson reveals how fear survives not through danger, but through distance. Fear grows in the absence of contact. When something is avoided, the brain never gets updated information. It fills the gap with imagination, and imagination almost always exaggerates the threat. Avoidance teaches the nervous system that fear is justified. Each time you escape discomfort, the brain interprets relief as proof that avoidance worked. This creates a powerful feedback loop. The short-term calm reinforces the long-term fear. What was once manageable becomes overwhelming simply because it remains unchallenged. The mind is designed to learn through exposure. Without exposure, fear stays frozen in its most intense form. The imagined scenario becomes more threatening than reality ever was. Over time, the fear expands, attaching itself to related situations, thoughts, or environments. Avoidance feels protective, but it quietly reduces confidence. It sends the message that you are incapable of handling discomfort. The brain absorbs this message and adjusts behavior accordingly, shrinking your sense of safety and control. This is why fear often grows in silence. Unspoken worries gain power. Untested assumptions harden into belief. Avoidance doesn't remove fear. It preserves it. Understanding this lesson changes how fear is faced. Relief is no longer the goal. Learning is. Each moment of engagement gives the nervous system new evidence, And when the brain learns that discomfort can be survived, fear begins to lose its authority. Most people overestimate how much others think about them. This lesson reveals how self-focus quietly distorts perception. The human mind treats the self as the center of experience, so it assumes that others are just as focused on us as we are on ourselves. In reality, most people are preoccupied with their own thoughts, fears, and concerns. The brain exaggerates social attention because it evolved to monitor acceptance and rejection. Being judged once carried survival consequences, so the mind stays alert for signs of evaluation. This creates the feeling of being constantly observed, even when no one is paying attention. Moments that feel embarrassing or significant to you barely register to others. They move on quickly because your experience is not central to their internal world. But your brain replays it, amplifies it, and treats it as proof of exposure. This distortion fuels anxiety and self-consciousness. People censor themselves, avoid risks, and shrink their expression out of fear of scrutiny that rarely exists. The imagined spotlight feels real, even though it's mostly self-generated. Understanding this lesson creates emotional freedom. When you realize how little mental space you occupy in others' minds, pressure loosens. Mistakes become lighter. Expression feels safer. The fear of being watched fades when you recognize that everyone else is too busy managing their own inner world to monitor yours. Emotional pain demands attention just like physical pain. This lesson exposes why suppressed emotions never truly disappear. Emotional pain is not a weakness or an overreaction. It is a signal. Just like physical pain alerts the body to injury, emotional pain alerts the mind to something unresolved, threatened, or lost. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away, it makes it louder. The brain processes emotional pain in many of the same regions as physical pain. That's why rejection can feel like a punch to the chest and grief can feel heavy in the body. When emotional pain is dismissed or minimized, the nervous system escalates its response. Anxiety increases, irritability surfaces, and numbness sets in as a last resort. People often try to outthink emotional pain. They distract themselves, stay busy, or rationalize their feelings away, but pain doesn't respond to logic. It responds to acknowledgement. Until it is recognized, it will continue to interrupt daily life through mood swings, exhaustion, or sudden emotional reactions. This is why unresolved emotional pain shows up in unexpected ways. A small comment triggers tears. A minor setback feels overwhelming. The pain isn't new, it's overdue. Paying attention to emotional pain doesn't mean being consumed by it. It means listening to what it's signaling. Just as you wouldn't ignore a broken bone, ignoring emotional pain delays healing. The mind demands attention not to punish, but to protect, reminding you that something inside needs care before balance can return. People often confuse intensity with love. This lesson reveals how emotional stimulation can be mistaken for emotional security. Intensity feels powerful. It creates urgency, obsession, and heightened focus, which the brain interprets as significance. Strong emotional reactions feel meaningful, so people assume that what feels intense must be love. The nervous system plays a major role in this confusion. Intensity often comes from unpredictability, emotional highs and lows, and fear of loss. These states activate stress hormones that heighten attention and attachment. The result feels passionate, consuming, and unforgettable, but it is often driven by anxiety rather than care. Love, by contrast, is quieter. It feels stable, safe, and consistent. It doesn't constantly activate the nervous system. Because of this, love can feel unfamiliar or even boring to those accustomed to chaos. The absence of emotional spikes can be misread as lack of connection. Emotionally, this lesson explains why people are drawn to relationships that exhaust them. Intensity creates the illusion of depth while slowly eroding emotional safety. The drama becomes proof of attachment, even as it causes pain. This confusion keeps people chasing emotional highs instead of emotional health. When intensity fades, they assume love is gone, not realizing that what disappeared was stimulation, not connection. Without understanding this distinction, people repeatedly mistake emotional turbulence for love and stability for emptiness. Growth feels like loss before it feels like progress. This lesson reveals why personal growth is often misinterpreted as failure. Before anything new is gained, something familiar is left behind. The brain registers that departure as loss, not advancement. Even positive change triggers grief because it disrupts identity, routine, and emotional attachment. Growth requires letting go of old patterns, relationships, and versions of the self that once provided comfort. The mind doesn't immediately recognize what's being built. It only notices what's gone. Familiar roles dissolve, certainty fades, and the nervous system reacts as if something important has been taken away. This is why growth often feels lonely and disorienting. You no longer fit where you once belonged, but you haven't yet arrived where you're going. The space in between feels empty. The brain prefers clear narratives, and growth exists in uncertainty. Loss feels concrete, progress feels abstract. Emotionally, growth challenges identity. Old coping mechanisms, beliefs, and behaviors lose relevance. Even if they were unhealthy, they were known. Releasing them can feel like losing protection. The discomfort isn't a sign of regression, it's a sign of transition. Understanding this lesson reframes the pain. Feeling worse doesn't mean you're moving backward. It often means you're shedding something that can't come with you. Growth doesn't announce itself with relief. It begins with grief, confusion, and discomfort, and only later reveals the expansion that made the loss necessary. Familiar dysfunction feels safer than healthy uncertainty. This lesson exposes why people remain attached to situations they know are unhealthy. The brain equates familiarity with safety, even when that familiarity is painful. Dysfunction comes with patterns the nervous system understands. It knows what to expect, how to react, and how to survive within it. Healthy uncertainty removes those scripts. It introduces new emotional territory, new expectations, and the possibility of unfamiliar outcomes. Even when those outcomes are positive, the lack of predictability triggers anxiety. The brain would rather manage known chaos than navigate unknown calm. This is why stability can feel uncomfortable to someone raised in unpredictability. Peace feels empty. Consistency feels suspicious. The absence of stress leaves the nervous system without its usual signals, creating restlessness instead of relief. People often confuse this discomfort with intuition, believing something is wrong when things are actually healthy. In reality, the brain is adjusting to a new baseline. It is learning that safety doesn't have to hurt. Understanding this lesson explains why healing feels unsettling at first. Letting go of dysfunction isn't just a behavioral change, it's a neurological one. Until healthy patterns become familiar, the mind will try to pull you back to what it knows, even if what it knows has always been hurting you. People mirror the emotional energy you give them. This lesson reveals how emotions quietly spread between people without a single word being exchanged. Emotional energy is contagious because the human nervous system is designed to synchronize with others. Before logic engages, the brain reads facial expressions, tone, posture, and pace to determine how to respond. What you project emotionally becomes the signal others unconsciously follow. When you enter an interaction calm and grounded, you invite regulation. When you arrive tense, defensive, or irritated, you activate tension in the other person, even if they don't know why. People often believe others are reacting to what they said, when in reality they are responding to how it felt to be around them. This mirroring happens automatically. The brain seeks alignment because emotional mismatch feels uncomfortable. If someone raises their emotional intensity, the other person often rises to meet it. If someone softens, the energy tends to follow. This is why conflicts escalate quickly and why calm presence can quietly de-escalate them. Emotional mirroring also explains why certain people feel draining and others feel safe. It's not always about personality, but about regulation. People unconsciously exchange emotional states, amplifying what is present. Understanding this lesson shifts how you influence interactions. You realize you don't just bring words into a room, you bring a nervous system. The emotional energy you carry sets the tone. Others reflect it back, not out of intention, but because human connection is wired to move in sync. The brain prioritizes survival over happiness. This lesson explains why feeling safe often matters more than feeling fulfilled. The human brain evolved to keep you alive, not to make you happy. Its primary function is threat detection, risk avoidance, and pattern recognition. Happiness is optional. Survival is not. Because of this, the brain is constantly scanning for danger, even when none exists. It remembers pain more vividly than pleasure and reacts faster to loss than to gain. This bias keeps you alert, but it also keeps you anxious. The brain would rather you be cautious and unhappy than relaxed and vulnerable. This is why change feels frightening even when it promises improvement. Familiar discomfort feels safer than unfamiliar peace. The brain equates the known with survival, so it resists anything that disrupts routine, identity, or control. Happiness often requires uncertainty, and uncertainty feels dangerous. Emotionally, this lesson explains why people stay in unfulfilling jobs, relationships, and habits. Stability feels like protection, even when it slowly drains joy. The brain confuses comfort with safety and safety with survival. Understanding this lesson removes self-blame. You're not weak for choosing what feels safe over what feels fulfilling. You're responding to biology. Real happiness often begins where the brain's alarms are triggered, which is why growth feels uncomfortable long before it feels rewarding. Being alone can be addictive once it feels peaceful. This lesson reveals how peace can quietly replace chaos as a source of emotional regulation. When solitude stops feeling empty and starts feeling safe, the nervous system learns something new. Silence becomes restorative instead of threatening. Aloneness turns into relief. For people who have lived in constant emotional noise, conflict, or overstimulation, peace feels powerful. Being alone means no performance, no explanation, no emotional labor. The body relaxes because it no longer has to anticipate reactions or manage expectations. That relief is deeply reinforcing. Over time, the brain associates solitude with safety. Social interaction, once normal, begins to feel draining or intrusive. It's not that connection is unwanted, but that peace is no longer negotiable. The mind becomes protective of the calm it fought hard to find. This is why solitude can start to feel addictive. It offers control over emotional input. There are no surprises, no misunderstandings, no disruptions. The nervous system stabilizes in the absence of external demands. However, this attachment isn't about avoidance alone. It's about contrast. Once someone experiences peaceful solitude, chaotic connection becomes intolerable. The desire to protect inner calm outweighs the desire to be constantly engaged. Understanding this lesson explains why some people pull back after healing. It's not withdrawal, it's discernment. Peace teaches standards, and once the mind learns what calm feels like, it becomes selective about anything that threatens it. People interpret boundaries as rejection when they lack them. This lesson reveals how personal limits can feel threatening to those who never learned to set their own. Boundaries create definition, and definition can feel like separation. For someone without internal boundaries, another person's limits don't register as self-respect. They register as distance, exclusion, or abandonment. The brain interprets boundaries through personal experience. When someone equates closeness with access and availability, any restriction feels like emotional withdrawal. A simple no becomes loaded with meaning. It triggers insecurity, not because the boundary is harsh, but because it exposes an internal void. People who lack boundaries often rely on others for regulation and validation. When that access is limited, the nervous system panics. The boundary feels like rejection because it interrupts a familiar dynamic of overconnection or emotional dependence. This is why boundary setting can provoke guilt, anger, or manipulation. The reaction isn't about the boundary itself, but about what it disrupts. It forces the other person to face their own lack of limits. Understanding this lesson reframes pushback. Resistance doesn't mean your boundary is wrong. It often means it is unfamiliar. Boundaries don't reject people. They clarify roles. But to someone without them, clarity can feel like loss. Your mood influences your memory. This lesson explains why the past can feel different depending on how you feel in the present. Memory is not a neutral archive. It is filtered through emotion. Your brain doesn't retrieve memories objectively. It retrieves the ones that match your current mood. When you feel low, your mind searches for evidence that justifies that feeling. When you feel hopeful, it does the opposite. This happens because emotion acts as a lens. A sad or anxious mood activates memories associated with loss, failure, or rejection. Positive experiences fade into the background, not because they didn't happen, but because they don't fit the emotional state your brain is trying to maintain. The mind prefers internal consistency over accuracy. This is why bad days feel heavier than they should. A single negative emotion can unlock a chain of related memories, making the pain feel bigger and older than it actually is. You're not just reacting to the present moment, you're reliving emotionally similar moments from the past. The same mechanism works in reverse. When you feel confident or calm, past challenges feel smaller and more manageable. You remember resilience instead of defeat. The events didn't change, but the emotional filter did. Understanding this lesson helps you avoid mistaking emotional recall for truth. A dark mood can convince you that life has always been this way. It hasn't. Your memory is being shaped by how you feel now. Emotions don't just color the present, they quietly rewrite the past you remember. People remember negative experiences more vividly than positive ones. This lesson reveals how memory is shaped by protection, not balance. The brain is wired to prioritize negative experiences because they signal danger. Pain, embarrassment, rejection, and fear are stored with intensity so they can be avoided in the future. Positive moments feel good, but they rarely carry the same survival value. A single negative experience can outweigh dozens of positive ones because the emotional charge is stronger. The nervous system tags it as important, replaying it repeatedly to prevent it from happening again. This is why criticism lingers longer than praise and why one bad moment can overshadow an entire good day. Emotionally, this creates an unfair internal narrative. People remember what hurt them more clearly than what supported them. Success fades quickly, while failure becomes vivid. Over time, this distorts self-image, making people feel inadequate despite evidence to the contrary. This lesson also explains why trust is fragile. One betrayal can erase years of reliability. The brain would rather overreact than underestimate a threat. It chooses caution over accuracy. Understanding this helps explain emotional heaviness that seems disproportionate. You're not ungrateful or pessimistic. You're responding to a brain designed to protect you by amplifying pain. Without conscious effort, negative experiences naturally dominate memory, shaping perception even when they no longer represent reality. Insecurity seeks control. This lesson reveals how control is often mistaken for strength when it is actually a defense. Insecurity creates internal instability, and the mind responds by trying to regulate the external world. When someone feels uncertain about themselves, controlling people, situations, or outcomes becomes a way to feel temporarily safe. Control reduces unpredictability. It gives the illusion of stability when internal confidence is lacking. The insecure mind believes that if everything is managed, monitored, or constrained, discomfort can be avoided. This is why insecurity often shows up as micromanagement, jealousy, rigidity, or emotional dominance. The need for control isn't about power, it's about fear of loss, rejection, chaos, or being exposed. When trust in oneself is weak, trust in others feels dangerous. Control becomes a substitute for self-assurance. This is why insecure people struggle with uncertainty. They overthink, demand reassurance, or impose rules to quiet inner anxiety. Letting go feels threatening because it requires faith in outcomes and in oneself. Control feels safer than vulnerability. Ironically, control increases tension. It strains relationships and reinforces the belief that safety only exists when everything is tightly managed. The nervous system never fully relaxes because it's always on guard. Understanding this lesson shifts perspective. Controlling behavior is not confidence, it's compensation. Real security doesn't need to restrict. It allows flexibility, trust, and space. When insecurity fades, the urge to control weakens because safety no longer depends on managing everything outside. People trust consistency more than charisma. This lesson reveals why reliability quietly outperforms charm over time. Charisma captures attention, but consistency builds safety. The brain looks for patterns to determine who can be trusted, and repeated behavior carries more weight than impressive moments or confident words. Charismatic people create emotional highs. They can inspire, excite, and persuade in the moment. But if their actions fluctuate, the nervous system stays alert. Unpredictability, even when entertaining, prevents true trust from forming. The brain relaxes only when it knows what to expect. Consistency sends a clear signal: stability. When someone shows up the same way over time, the mind stops scanning for threat. Promises begin to matter because they are followed by action. Small, repeated behaviors create credibility that no performance can replace. This is why trust often grows slowly and quietly. It's built through reliability in ordinary moments, not dramatic gestures. Charisma can open doors, but consistency determines whether they stay open. Understanding this lesson changes how influence works long-term. People may be drawn to energy, but they attach to dependability. Over time, consistency becomes invisible because it feels normal, yet its absence is immediately felt. Trust isn't created by who impresses you once, but by who proves themselves again and again. Overthinking is your brain trying to protect you. This lesson reframes a habit most people judge themselves harshly for. Overthinking is not a flaw in intelligence or willpower. It is a survival response. The brain overanalyzes because it is searching for certainty in situations that feel unpredictable or emotionally risky. It believes that if it thinks enough, it can prevent pain. When the mind senses threat, especially social or emotional threat, it shifts into problem-solving mode. It replays conversations, imagines outcomes, and scans for mistakes. This creates the illusion of control. Thinking feels productive, even when it's exhausting, because it gives the nervous system something to do. The problem is that overthinking rarely leads to resolution. It leads to rumination. The brain keeps circling the same possibilities, not to solve them, but to stay alert. Calm feels unsafe when the mind believes something could go wrong, so it stays busy. This pattern often develops after experiences where pain felt sudden or uncontrollable. The brain learns that being caught off guard hurts, so it tries to anticipate everything. Overthinking becomes a shield. Understanding this lesson reduces self-blame. The mind isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to keep you safe, but protection through constant analysis comes at a cost. It drains energy, distorts perspective, and increases anxiety. The brain doesn't need more thinking. It needs reassurance that not every unknown is a threat. The need to be right often blocks growth. This lesson reveals how ego disguises itself as certainty. Being right feels stabilizing because it protects identity. When someone believes they are right, their sense of self feels intact and secure. Questioning that belief introduces doubt, and doubt feels like weakness to a mind that equates certainty with safety. The brain treats being wrong as a threat, not an opportunity. Admitting error forces reflection, vulnerability, and change. It requires letting go of familiar narratives and accepting that past decisions may have been flawed. To avoid this discomfort, people defend their views, dismiss new information, and resist feedback, even when it could help them evolve. Emotionally, this creates stagnation. Growth requires openness, but the need to be right closes the door to learning. The moment someone prioritizes winning over understanding, curiosity disappears. Conversations become battles instead of exchanges. This lesson explains why experience alone doesn't create wisdom. Without humility, years pass without insight. People repeat the same mistakes, convinced they already know better. The emotional weight lies in realizing how much potential is lost to pride. Growth demands the courage to be wrong, to sit in uncertainty, and to revise your understanding of yourself and the world. Until being right feels less important than becoming better, development remains limited by ego rather than expanded by awareness. Emotional intelligence beats raw intelligence in relationships. This lesson reveals why being right is far less important than being attuned. Raw intelligence processes information. Emotional intelligence processes people. In relationships, understanding emotions matters more than understanding facts because connection is built through feeling, not logic. Someone can be brilliant and still struggle deeply in relationships if they lack emotional awareness. Intelligence can solve problems, but it can't soothe insecurity, diffuse tension, or create safety on its own. Emotional intelligence allows a person to sense shifts in mood, unspoken needs, and emotional boundaries before conflict escalates. The nervous system responds to empathy, not explanations. Feeling understood calms the body. Feeling analyzed often does the opposite. This is why logical solutions can feel dismissive when emotions are high. Emotional intelligence recognizes when reassurance is needed instead of advice. Relationships thrive on regulation. Emotional intelligence helps manage reactions, pause before responding, and choose tone over impulse. It creates space for vulnerability without judgment. Raw intelligence may win debates, but emotional intelligence preserves trust. This lesson explains why emotionally intelligent people feel grounding to be around. They make others feel safe, not corrected. They listen beyond words and respond to what's underneath. Understanding this shifts priorities. Connection isn't about impressing or proving competence. It's about presence. Emotional intelligence builds bridges, where intelligence alone builds arguments. In relationships, the ability to understand and regulate emotion is what sustains closeness long after intellect fades into the background. People want honesty until it makes them uncomfortable. This lesson exposes a contradiction at the center of human communication. People claim to value honesty because it sounds virtuous and mature. In theory, truth represents clarity, trust, and integrity. In practice, honesty is only welcomed when it aligns with comfort and self-image. The brain enjoys honesty when it confirms existing beliefs or validates emotions. It feels affirming. But when honesty challenges behavior, exposes blind spots, or threatens identity, the nervous system reacts defensively. What was requested as truth suddenly feels like criticism or betrayal. Discomfort triggers protection. People withdraw, rationalize, or attack the messenger, not because the honesty is wrong, but because it touches something unresolved. The desire for honesty is often conditional. It is welcomed only as long as it doesn't require change. This is why people say they want feedback but resist it. They want transparency without vulnerability. They want truth without emotional cost. The moment honesty demands accountability, it becomes threatening. Understanding this lesson reshapes how you speak and listen. Resistance doesn't mean honesty failed, it means it landed. Truth creates discomfort before it creates growth. And until someone values growth more than emotional ease, honesty will always be praised in words and resisted in reality. Stress narrows your thinking. This lesson explains why intelligent, capable people make poor decisions under pressure. Stress shifts the brain into survival mode. When the nervous system perceives threat, it prioritizes speed and protection over depth and creativity. The mind doesn't expand to find better options, it contracts to eliminate danger. Under stress, the brain focuses on immediate outcomes. Long-term consequences fade, nuance disappears. You become more reactive, more rigid, and less open to alternative perspectives. This is not a failure of character, but a biological response. The brain is trying to conserve energy and reduce uncertainty. Stress also reduces access to higher-level thinking. Complex reasoning, empathy, and flexible problem-solving require a sense of safety. When that safety is gone, the brain defaults to familiar patterns. You repeat old habits, even unhelpful ones, because they feel known. This narrowing explains why stress fuels conflict. People misinterpret tone, assume negative intent, and escalate quickly. The mind fills gaps with threat-based assumptions. Small problems feel urgent. Simple decisions feel overwhelming. Understanding this lesson changes how you relate to yourself and others under pressure. Narrow thinking doesn't mean someone is incapable or unwilling. It means their nervous system is overloaded. Until stress is reduced, clarity cannot return. The mind can only see broadly when it feels safe enough to do so. People respect those who respect themselves. This lesson reveals that respect is sensed before it is granted. Self-respect is not announced or explained. It is communicated through behavior, boundaries, and emotional posture. The way someone treats themselves teaches others how to treat them. People watch closely, even when they don't realize it. When someone respects themselves, they don't overexplain, chase approval, or tolerate consistent disrespect. Their calm refusal to accept less sends a signal of internal stability. This signal is felt on a nervous system level. It communicates confidence, self-trust, and emotional safety, which others instinctively respond to. The absence of self-respect creates the opposite effect. When someone repeatedly ignores their own boundaries, tolerates mistreatment, or seeks validation externally, people sense instability. Even kind people may unconsciously push limits, not out of cruelty, but because the line was never clearly drawn. Emotionally, this lesson can be difficult because it removes the comfort of blame. It shows that respect is not demanded, it is modeled. How you speak to yourself, what you allow, and what you walk away from shapes how you are perceived. Self-respect changes interactions without confrontation. It doesn't need force or explanation. People adjust automatically because they respond to the quiet authority of someone who knows their worth and behaves accordingly. The brain resists change even when change is good. This lesson reveals that resistance is not a sign of weakness or laziness, but a built-in survival response. The brain is designed to protect, not optimize. Familiar patterns feel safe because they are predictable. Even when a situation is harmful, the known harm feels less threatening than the unknown outcome of change. Change introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty activates fear. The brain cannot accurately predict new outcomes, so it assumes risk. This is why improvement often feels uncomfortable at first. Growth disrupts routines, identities, and expectations the nervous system has learned to rely on. The mind treats change as potential loss. It focuses on what might go wrong rather than what could improve. This negativity bias is protective in nature, but it also keeps people stuck. The brain would rather endure familiar discomfort than risk unfamiliar instability. This is why people hesitate before positive transitions. A better job, a healthier relationship, or personal growth can still trigger anxiety. The resistance isn't about the quality of the change, but about the uncertainty it carries. Understanding this lesson reduces self-judgment. Feeling resistance doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means your nervous system is adjusting. The discomfort is a sign of rewiring, not failure. When the brain learns through experience that change doesn't equal danger, resistance slowly fades, and what once felt threatening begins to feel normal. People fear abandonment more than incompatibility. This lesson reveals why people stay attached to relationships that clearly don't work. Incompatibility creates discomfort, but abandonment triggers survival fear. The brain associates separation with loss of safety, identity, and belonging, even when the connection itself is harmful or unfulfilling. Being mismatched can be rationalized. People tell themselves they can adjust, endure, or change. Abandonment offers no such illusion of control. It represents being left, replaced, or forgotten. The nervous system reacts to that possibility with panic, overriding logic and self-respect. This is why people cling harder when a relationship is clearly wrong. The pain of staying feels manageable compared to the terror of being alone. The brain chooses familiarity over alignment, presence over compatibility. Fear of abandonment also distorts perception. Red flags are minimized, boundaries are lowered, needs are silenced. The priority becomes keeping the connection alive at any cost, even if that cost is emotional erosion. Understanding this lesson explains why love is often confused with survival attachment. Wanting someone doesn't always mean they are right for you. Sometimes it means your nervous system is afraid of what happens when they're gone. Until abandonment fear is addressed, incompatibility will always feel easier to tolerate than walking away. Self-awareness increases discomfort before it increases peace. This lesson explains why many people avoid looking inward even when they say they want growth. Self-awareness removes protective illusions. It exposes patterns, motives, and behaviors that were once hidden behind excuses and habits. When those layers fall away, discomfort rises because the mind can no longer look away. Becoming self-aware means noticing your role in your own pain. It means recognizing how you contribute to conflict, avoidance, or stagnation. That realization can feel destabilizing. The ego resists it because it threatens the story of who you believe yourself to be. Peace based on ignorance feels easier than discomfort based on truth. This stage often feels worse, not better. You become more sensitive to your reactions, more aware of your flaws, and less able to numb yourself with distraction. Old coping mechanisms stop working because you can see through them. Growth feels heavy because denial is no longer available. Many people mistake this phase for regression. They believe something is wrong because awareness brings anxiety instead of relief. In reality, this discomfort is evidence of progress. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. Peace arrives later after responsibility is integrated and self-compassion replaces self-judgment. But before that, awareness forces confrontation. It asks you to sit with truths you once avoided. The discomfort isn't the problem, it's the passage. Self-awareness disrupts before it settles, because clarity must first dismantle what was built on avoidance. People feel safer criticizing others than questioning themselves. This lesson reveals how criticism functions as a psychological defense. Pointing out flaws in others creates distance from one's own insecurities. It redirects attention outward, allowing the mind to avoid uncomfortable self-examination. Criticism feels active and controlled, while self-questioning feels vulnerable and destabilizing. The brain prefers certainty, even negative certainty, over uncertainty. When someone criticizes another person, they reinforce a sense of superiority or correctness. Questioning oneself, however, threatens identity. It opens the possibility of being wrong, flawed, or responsible. That possibility feels dangerous to the ego. Emotionally, criticism offers temporary relief. It creates the illusion of strength while masking fear and self-doubt. The moment attention turns inward, defenses weaken and discomfort rises. For many people, avoiding that discomfort becomes a habit, turning criticism into a reflex. This lesson explains why blame is common and accountability is rare. It's easier to analyze others than to confront personal patterns. Growth requires humility, and humility feels unsafe to an ego built on protection. Understanding this changes how criticism is interpreted. Often, it says more about the critic than the target. When people choose to criticize instead of reflect, they aren't attacking truth. They're protecting themselves from it. Love doesn't fix emotional wounds. Awareness does. This lesson challenges one of the most comforting myths people cling to. Love feels powerful, but it is not corrective on its own. Emotional wounds don't disappear because someone cares. They resurface precisely in the spaces where closeness exists. Love doesn't bypass pain, it exposes it. Unhealed wounds shape perception. They distort how affection is received and how conflict is interpreted. Someone can be deeply loved and still feel unsafe, unworthy, or abandoned. The problem isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of unexamined patterns that hijack emotional responses. Love can soothe, but it cannot identify the root of pain. Without awareness, wounds repeat themselves through triggers, defensiveness, and emotional reactivity. The mind keeps replaying old survival strategies because it doesn't know another way to respond. Awareness interrupts this cycle. It brings unconscious reactions into conscious choice. When someone recognizes their triggers, fears, and emotional habits, they gain the ability to respond rather than react. Love becomes supportive instead of corrective. This is why relationships often fail despite genuine affection. Love is offered, but awareness is missing. The wound keeps interpreting closeness through past pain. Understanding this lesson shifts responsibility. Healing doesn't come from being loved better. It comes from seeing yourself clearly. Awareness turns love from a bandage into a space where growth can actually occur because the wound is no longer invisible. Being calm is a form of power. This lesson reveals why calmness unsettles people more than anger ever could. Calm signals control. It shows that your emotions are not easily hijacked and that you are not reacting from fear or impulse. The nervous system of others reads this as strength, even if they can't explain why. When someone remains calm under pressure, the brain assumes authority. Chaos, volume, and emotional intensity are often mistaken for power, but they usually signal loss of control. Calmness communicates that you are grounded enough to choose your response rather than be driven by it. This is why calm people dominate tense situations without raising their voice. They slow the emotional tempo of the interaction. Others either mirror that steadiness or feel exposed by their own reactivity. Calm creates asymmetry. One person is regulated, the other is not. Calm also protects clarity. When emotions spike, perception narrows and mistakes multiply. Remaining calm keeps the mind open and deliberate, allowing better decisions and sharper boundaries. It turns emotional energy into focus. Understanding this lesson reframes strength. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It is felt in presence, pacing, and restraint. Calm is not passivity. It is mastery. And mastery is threatening to anyone who relies on emotional chaos to gain control. People interpret confidence as authority. This lesson reveals how perception often overrides reality. Confidence doesn't need proof to be persuasive. It needs presence. When someone speaks with certainty, steady tone, and decisive body language, the brain of the observer fills in the gaps. Authority is assumed, not evaluated. The mind equates confidence with competence because uncertainty feels unsafe. Humans are wired to look for leaders in moments of ambiguity. Confidence signals direction. It suggests control, clarity, and stability, even when those qualities are not backed by experience or knowledge. This is why confident people are trusted faster, followed more easily, and questioned less often. The effect is emotional, not logical. Confidence reduces cognitive load for others. It removes the need to analyze deeply or question assumptions. Doubt requires effort. Certainty feels relieving. So people outsource judgment to whoever appears most sure. This is also why hesitation is punished socially. When someone sounds unsure, even if they are correct, their message loses weight. The content matters less than the delivery. Confidence frames information as reliable before it is verified. This dynamic can be constructive or dangerous. It allows capable leaders to guide others effectively, but it also enables manipulation. Confidence can mask ignorance, arrogance, or deceit. The brain doesn't naturally distinguish between earned authority and performed authority. Understanding this lesson sharpens awareness. You begin to notice how often influence is driven by certainty rather than truth. Confidence doesn't make someone right, but it makes them believable. And in social dynamics, believability often carries more power than accuracy. Your reactions reveal your triggers. This lesson exposes how the body responds faster than the mind can explain. Triggers are not created in the moment. They are activated. When something touches an unresolved wound, the nervous system reacts automatically, often with intensity that feels out of proportion to the situation. That intensity is the clue. Reactions are emotional echoes of past experiences. The present moment pulls on something unfinished, and the body responds as if the old threat is happening again. This is why certain words, tones, or behaviors provoke immediate anger, shutdown, or anxiety. The reaction isn't about what's happening now, but about what once happened and was never resolved. The mind often justifies the reaction afterward, building a logical story to explain it. But the truth appears in the speed and strength of the response. Calm situations don't produce explosive reactions. Triggers do. Emotionally, this lesson is uncomfortable because it removes external blame. It shows that the strongest reactions point inward. They highlight emotional wounds, asking for attention. Avoiding them keeps the pattern alive. Understanding triggers is not about suppressing reactions, but about listening to them. Each reaction carries information about unmet needs, unhealed pain, or threatened identity. Until those triggers are acknowledged and processed, the body will keep reacting, using emotion as a signal that something deeper is still unresolved. People trust actions more than words. This lesson reveals how trust is built through evidence, not intention. Words describe who someone wants to be. Actions show who they are when no explanation is available. The brain learns trust by observing patterns, not promises. Language is flexible. It can be adjusted, softened, or reshaped to fit any narrative. Actions are harder to manipulate because they require effort, consistency, and follow-through. This is why the nervous system pays closer attention to behavior than to speech. It's scanning for reliability, not reassurance. When words and actions align, trust feels natural. When they don't, confusion and doubt appear. Even kind or convincing words lose power if behavior contradicts them. The mind doesn't argue with this contradiction. It quietly remembers it. This is why repeated apologies without change feel empty. The words may sound sincere, but the lack of behavioral shift teaches the brain that nothing is different. Trust erodes not through one mistake, but through repeated inconsistency. Actions also regulate emotional safety. Showing up, respecting boundaries, and following through communicate care without needing explanation. These behaviors tell the nervous system that it can relax. Understanding this lesson changes how credibility works. Trust isn't earned by convincing others of your intentions. It's earned by making your behavior predictable. Over time, actions become your reputation, and once trust is shaped by what you do, Words become reinforcement instead of replacement. Emotional maturity often looks boring to immature minds. This lesson reveals why stability is frequently mistaken for lack of passion. Immature minds are drawn to intensity because intensity feels alive. Emotional highs and lows create stimulation, drama, and urgency. The nervous system mistakes chaos for connection and unpredictability for excitement. Emotional maturity removes that volatility. It replaces emotional spikes with consistency, communication, and regulation. To someone used to dysfunction, this can feel flat or uninteresting. Without constant emotional activation, the brain doesn't get the rush it has learned to crave. Maturity prioritizes calm over chaos, clarity over guessing, and repair over reaction. There is less emotional chasing and fewer power struggles. For an immature mind, this absence of drama can feel like emotional emptiness rather than peace. This is why emotionally mature people are sometimes described as dull, distant, or unexciting. In reality, they are predictable in a way that feels safe, not thrilling. Their behavior doesn't create emotional hooks or adrenaline spikes. Understanding this lesson explains mismatched attraction. What feels boring may actually be healthy, and what feels exciting may be familiar instability in disguise. Until someone learns to associate safety with connection, emotional maturity will continue to feel underwhelming to a nervous system addicted to emotional chaos. People seek validation when they lack self-trust. This lesson reveals that validation is not about praise, but about certainty. When people don't trust their own judgment, they look outward to confirm what they should feel, think, or choose. External approval becomes a substitute for internal confidence. It fills the gap where self-trust should be. Self-trust develops through experience, reflection, and honoring one's own decisions. When that process is interrupted by criticism, inconsistency, or conditional acceptance, doubt takes its place. The mind learns to question itself and defer to others. Validation becomes the signal that it's safe to move forward. This is why some people constantly ask for reassurance even after making decisions. They aren't unsure of the outcome, they're unsure of themselves. Without external confirmation, anxiety grows. With it, relief appears, but only temporarily. The danger is that validation creates dependency. The more someone relies on others to confirm their worth or choices, the weaker their internal compass becomes. Confidence fades because it's never practiced. Each decision feels heavier because it carries the weight of imagined judgment. Over time, this pattern shapes identity. People begin to perform instead of decide. They adapt instead of align. The fear is not making the wrong choice, but trusting oneself and being alone with the consequences. Understanding this lesson reframes validation seeking as a signal, not a flaw. It points to an absence of self-trust, not a hunger for attention. Until self-trust is rebuilt, validation will continue to feel necessary, even when it never fully satisfies. Boundaries expose who benefits from you having none. This lesson reveals that boundaries don't create conflict, they reveal it. When you begin to say no, limit access, or protect your time and energy, people's reactions become information. Those who respected you before will adapt. Those who benefited from your lack of boundaries will resist. The brain interprets boundaries as a change in the social contract. For people who gained comfort, control, or convenience from your compliance, that change feels like loss. Resistance often shows up as guilt, criticism, or accusations of selfishness. The goal is to pull you back into a role that served them. Emotionally, this lesson can be painful because it exposes conditional connection. You realize that some relationships were built on access, not care. The moment that access is limited, the relationship destabilizes. Boundaries don't push people away. They filter. They reveal who values you as a person and who values what you provide. This clarity can feel lonely at first, but it is honest. Understanding this lesson helps remove confusion. When someone reacts strongly to healthy boundaries, they are not responding to rejection. They are responding to the loss of benefit. Boundaries shine a light on hidden dynamics, making visible who respected you and who relied on you staying unprotected. The brain clings to patterns even when they hurt. This lesson reveals that pain is not enough to create change. Familiarity often feels safer than relief. The brain is a pattern recognition machine, and once a pattern is learned, it becomes efficient, automatic, and deeply embedded in the nervous system. Even harmful patterns feel predictable, and predictability feels safe. The brain doesn't ask whether a pattern is healthy. It asks whether it is known. Repetition creates certainty, and certainty reduces cognitive load. Breaking a pattern requires effort, awareness, and tolerance for discomfort. Staying in it requires none. This is why people repeat emotional dynamics that hurt them. Familiar rejection feels less frightening than unfamiliar acceptance. Familiar chaos feels easier to navigate than calm they don't know how to trust. The brain chooses what it understands, not what heals. Painful patterns are reinforced through relief cycles. Even brief moments of comfort within dysfunction teach the brain to stay. The nervous system adapts to stress and begins to treat it as baseline. Understanding this lesson explains why change feels threatening. Letting go of a pattern feels like losing structure, even if that structure was damaging. The brain resists because it fears instability more than pain. Awareness is the interruption. When a pattern is recognized, choice becomes possible. Until then, the brain follows what it has learned. It clings not because it enjoys suffering, but because it mistakes familiarity for safety and repetition for survival. People confuse attachment with love. This lesson reveals how easily emotional dependence disguises itself as deep connection. Attachment is driven by fear of loss, while love is driven by presence and choice. The nervous system often cannot tell the difference, especially when emotional security has been inconsistent in the past. Attachment feels urgent. It creates anxiety, possessiveness, and a constant need for reassurance. The brain becomes focused on maintaining access rather than nurturing connection. Love, by contrast, feels steady. It allows space, trust, and autonomy without triggering panic. People often label attachment as love because intensity feels meaningful. The fear of losing someone is mistaken for depth. But fear-based bonds are about regulation, not intimacy. The person becomes a source of emotional stability rather than a partner in mutual growth. This confusion is reinforced by early experiences. When care was unpredictable, attachment becomes tightly linked to survival. The brain learns that closeness must be guarded and controlled. Later in life, that pattern is repeated under the name of love. Understanding this lesson changes how relationships are evaluated. Love does not require constant tension to exist. It does not demand self-abandonment to survive. When connection is rooted in choice rather than fear, it feels calmer, not weaker. And calm is often misread by an attached mind as absence of love. Healing feels lonely because it changes familiar dynamics. This lesson explains why personal growth often creates distance before it creates peace. Healing alters patterns that once defined relationships. When you change how you respond, tolerate, or engage, the dynamic shifts. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may feel unsettled by the new one, even if the change is healthy. Familiar roles provide emotional predictability. Even dysfunctional patterns feel safe when they are known. Healing disrupts that safety. You stop over-explaining. You set boundaries. You react with calm instead of chaos. To others, this can feel like withdrawal or rejection, even though it is alignment. This is where loneliness enters. You may feel unseen because you're no longer participating in patterns that once created connection. Conversations feel different. Some bonds weaken. The comfort of familiarity fades before new, healthier connections form. The mind interprets this space as loss. Humans are wired to equate closeness with survival, so any distance triggers discomfort. Healing asks you to tolerate that discomfort without rushing back into old behaviors for relief. This loneliness is not a sign of failure. It is a transition. You are no longer who you were, but you haven't yet built relationships that match who you're becoming. Healing removes what no longer fits before it reveals what will. The isolation isn't punishment. It's the quiet space where new dynamics are waiting to take shape. People judge themselves by intentions and others by actions. This lesson reveals a fundamental bias in human perception. When evaluating themselves, people focus on what they meant to do, the context they were under, and the reasons behind their behavior. Intentions soften self-judgment. They allow mistakes to feel understandable, temporary, and forgivable. When judging others, that context disappears. Actions are taken at face value, stripped of internal struggle or explanation. The same behavior that is excused internally becomes evidence of character when observed externally. The mind fills in gaps with assumptions instead of empathy. Emotionally, this creates misunderstanding. People feel misjudged because their inner narrative is invisible. They know their motives, but others only see outcomes. This gap leads to resentment, defensiveness, and the feeling of being unfairly labeled. The brain uses this shortcut to protect self-image. If everyone were judged by intentions, accountability would feel unbearable. If others were judged with the same compassion applied inward, conflict would soften. But that requires effort and humility. This lesson explains why apologies feel insufficient and why explanations rarely land. People aren't arguing about facts, they're clashing narratives. Understanding this bias doesn't erase conflict, but it reveals why fairness feels so rare. Everyone is defending their intentions while judging someone else's actions. Emotional exhaustion reduces empathy. This lesson reveals that empathy is not an unlimited resource. It requires emotional energy, presence, and regulation. When someone is emotionally exhausted, their capacity to care shrinks, not because they become cold, but because their system is overloaded. Emotional exhaustion occurs when the nervous system is in a constant state of demand. Stress, unresolved conflict, caretaking, or prolonged pressure drain emotional reserves. When those reserves run low, the brain shifts into self-protection. It narrows focus inward to conserve energy. In this state, empathy feels costly. Other people's emotions register as additional weight rather than shared experience. Responses become shorter, patience thins, and compassion gives way to irritability or numbness. This isn't a moral failure, it's a biological response. The brain prioritizes survival over connection. When overwhelmed, it reduces sensitivity to external emotional cues. This is why emotionally exhausted people may seem distant, indifferent, or harsh. Their system is not lacking care, it's lacking capacity. Understanding this lesson changes how behavior is interpreted. A drop in empathy often signals depletion, not indifference. It also highlights the importance of emotional recovery. Rest, boundaries, and emotional safety restore the ability to feel with others. Empathy returns when the nervous system feels supported again. Until then, emotional exhaustion limits access to compassion, not because it disappears, but because the system is too drained to reach it. People fear being seen more than being wrong. This lesson reveals that exposure threatens the ego more deeply than error. Being wrong can be corrected, explained, or justified. Being seen removes the ability to hide. It exposes motives, insecurities, contradictions, and emotional truth. The brain experiences this kind of visibility as vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous. When someone is wrong, they can argue facts. When they are seen, they must face themselves. The nervous system reacts to that exposure with shame, avoidance, or defensiveness. It's safer to appear incorrect than to feel exposed. This is why people deflect, joke, or change the subject when conversations get too personal. Depth removes masks. Being seen means losing control over how you are perceived. Once the inner world is revealed, it cannot be taken back. Fear of being seen also fuels perfectionism and performance. People would rather present a polished version of themselves than risk showing uncertainty or emotional truth. Mistakes feel manageable. Visibility feels permanent. Understanding this lesson explains why honesty is often avoided even when it would resolve conflict. Being wrong risks reputation. Being seen risks identity. Until someone feels emotionally safe enough to exist without armor, being wrong will always feel less threatening than being fully visible. Self-respect is louder than self-praise. This lesson reveals why words rarely convince when behavior doesn't align. Self-praise is verbal. It announces confidence, worth, or strength. Self-respect is behavioral. It shows up in boundaries, consistency, and what you refuse to tolerate. People respond more to what you do than what you declare. The brain is trained to trust patterns, not statements. Anyone can say they value themselves, but self-respect is evident in choices made under pressure. It appears in how you handle disrespect, how you protect your time, and how you treat your own needs. These signals are quiet but unmistakable. Self-praise often emerges from insecurity. It seeks to be seen, acknowledged, or believed. Self-respect doesn't seek approval. It doesn't need to explain itself. It communicates through calm firmness rather than volume. This is why people who talk less about their worth often command more respect. Their behavior creates clarity. Others sense limits, stability, and self-trust. There is no confusion about where they stand because their actions reinforce it consistently. Over time, self-respect reshapes how others interact with you. It sets the tone without confrontation. It doesn't demand recognition, yet it earns it. While self-praise fades the moment words stop, self-respect lingers. It speaks through restraint, integrity, and alignment, making it far more powerful than any affirmation spoken out loud. People stay in bad situations because they fear regret. This lesson reveals how fear of future pain can trap people in present suffering. Regret feels terrifying because it's imagined as permanent and self-inflicted. The mind tells a story where leaving leads to loss, shame, and irreversible mistakes. Staying, even when painful, feels safer because it avoids the possibility of what if. The brain prefers known discomfort over uncertain outcomes. A bad situation is predictable. The pain is familiar and manageable. Leaving introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty activates fear. Regret becomes the symbol of that fear, convincing people that making no choice is better than making the wrong one. Emotionally, this creates paralysis. People convince themselves that enduring discomfort is responsible, loyal, or practical. They romanticize endurance while ignoring the slow erosion happening beneath it. Fear disguises itself as patience. This lesson explains why people stay in unhealthy relationships, unfulfilling careers, and stagnant identities long past their expiration. They aren't staying because they believe it's right. They're staying because they're afraid of blaming themselves later. Understanding this exposes the illusion. Regret doesn't come only from leaving. It also comes from staying too long. The pain people fear in the future is often already happening in the present, just spread thin enough to feel tolerable. The brain avoids uncertainty more than danger. This lesson reveals a counterintuitive truth about fear. The unknown feels more threatening than actual risk. The brain is built to predict, and when it can't, it assumes the worst. Uncertainty removes the ability to prepare, and without preparation, the nervous system stays on high alert. Danger that is familiar becomes manageable. Even painful or risky situations feel easier to tolerate when their outcomes are predictable. The brain can adapt to almost anything as long as it knows what's coming. Uncertainty offers no such anchor. It creates mental chaos, forcing the brain to constantly scan for threats that may or may not exist. This is why people stay in unhealthy environments. Known pain feels safer than unknown change. The brain prefers a guaranteed negative outcome over a possible positive one it can't calculate. Certainty reduces anxiety, even when the certainty is harmful. Uncertainty also challenges identity. When outcomes are unclear, roles and expectations blur. The mind loses its sense of control, and control is one of its primary regulators of safety. Avoiding uncertainty becomes a way to preserve emotional stability. This lesson explains why hesitation appears before growth. New paths feel dangerous, not because they are, but because they are undefined. The fear isn't rooted in what might go wrong, but in not knowing what will happen at all. Understanding this shifts how fear is interpreted. Anxiety isn't always a warning sign. Often, it's a response to ambiguity. When the brain learns through experience that uncertainty can be survived, its grip weakens and possibilities begin to feel less threatening than staying stuck. People want deep connection but avoid deep conversations. This lesson reveals a tension between desire and fear. Deep connection requires emotional exposure, and exposure demands vulnerability. While people long to feel understood, chosen, and emotionally close, the process of getting there feels risky. The brain associates depth with potential rejection, judgment, or emotional loss. Surface conversations feel safe because they keep identity protected. Depth removes that protection. Sharing real thoughts, doubts, and emotions invites the possibility of being misunderstood or dismissed. The nervous system prioritizes safety over intimacy, even when intimacy is what the heart wants most. This is why many relationships remain emotionally shallow despite closeness in time or proximity. People wait for connection to happen without realizing it requires participation. They want to be known without being revealed. Avoiding deep conversations also preserves control. As long as things stay light, nothing is at stake. Depth creates consequences. Once something meaningful is said, it can't be unsaid. Understanding this lesson explains emotional loneliness. Connection isn't blocked by lack of opportunity, but by avoidance of risk. Until someone tolerates the discomfort of vulnerability, deep connection remains a wish rather than an experience. Growth often requires disappointing people. This lesson exposes a painful reality that sits at the center of personal evolution. Growth changes priorities, boundaries, and direction. When those changes occur, they inevitably conflict with expectations others have placed on you. Disappointment is not a side effect of growth. It is often the price of it. People become attached to the version of you that meets their needs. When you begin to say no, choose differently, or step away from roles that no longer fit, it disrupts their sense of comfort. Even healthy change can feel like loss to those who benefited from the old dynamic. The discomfort comes from conditioning. Many people are taught that being good means being agreeable. Approval becomes tied to compliance. Growth challenges this belief by forcing you to choose alignment over acceptance. That choice creates tension because it breaks unspoken agreements. Disappointing others triggers guilt, not because you've done something wrong, but because you are violating expectations. The nervous system reacts as if connection is at risk. This fear often keeps people stuck, repeating patterns that no longer serve them. Understanding this lesson reframes disappointment. It doesn't automatically mean harm or selfishness. It often means honesty. Growth asks you to tolerate temporary discomfort in exchange for long-term integrity. If everyone is comfortable with who you're becoming, you may not be growing at all. Growth rarely fits neatly into other people's plans, and that friction is a signal of movement, not failure. People trust those who make them feel understood. This lesson reveals that trust is emotional before it is rational. People don't build trust by analyzing credentials or facts first. They build it by feeling seen. When someone feels understood, their nervous system relaxes. Safety replaces vigilance, and openness becomes possible. Being understood doesn't require agreement. It requires presence. When someone listens without rushing, reflects emotions accurately, and acknowledges perspective without dismissal, the other person feels validated. That validation signals respect. Respect signals safety. Safety becomes trust. The brain responds strongly to this because feeling understood reduces isolation. Humans are wired to seek connection, and misunderstanding feels like rejection. When someone captures your inner experience and mirrors it back accurately, it creates an emotional bond stronger than logic or persuasion. Emotionally, this explains why people follow leaders, therapists, and communicators who make them feel heard, even if they don't always have the best solutions. Trust grows not from answers, but from resonance. This lesson also explains why advice often fails. Without understanding, guidance feels intrusive. With understanding, even difficult feedback feels supportive. People don't trust those who talk the most. They trust those who make them feel less alone in their thoughts. Understanding builds trust because it tells the nervous system, without words, that it is safe to open up. Emotional wounds distort perception. This lesson reveals how past pain quietly reshapes reality. Emotional wounds don't stay in the past, they become filters. The brain uses previous hurt as a reference point to interpret present experiences, even when the current situation is different. What once protected you begins to mislead you. When a wound is unhealed, the nervous system stays alert for similar threats. Neutral behavior can feel hostile. Distance can feel like rejection. Silence can feel like abandonment. The reaction is fast and emotional because it's rooted in memory, not in what's actually happening. The mind isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to keep you safe using outdated information. But safety strategies formed in pain don't adapt unless they're examined. They override logic and color perception before awareness has a chance to intervene. This is why emotionally wounded people can misread intentions, overreact to small cues, or feel hurt in situations that weren't meant to cause harm. The perception feels real because the emotional response is real. The body reacts as if the past is happening again. Understanding this lesson introduces compassion, not self-blame. Distorted perception isn't weakness, it's an unhealed signal. Awareness creates separation between memory and moment. When wounds are acknowledged, the lens begins to clear. Until then, the past quietly narrates the present, shaping reality through pain rather than truth. People mistake comfort for happiness. This lesson reveals how easily emotional numbness is confused with fulfillment. Comfort feels good because it reduces effort, uncertainty, and risk. The nervous system relaxes when nothing is demanded and nothing threatens. Over time, that absence of discomfort starts to feel like contentment. But comfort is passive. Happiness requires engagement, meaning, and emotional movement. It involves challenge, growth, and moments of discomfort. The brain often resists this because effort activates uncertainty, while comfort promises stability. This is why people settle into routines that feel safe but empty. They confuse the lack of pain with the presence of joy. Life becomes manageable rather than meaningful. The days feel smooth but flat. Comfort dulls emotional sensitivity. It keeps people from feeling lows, but it also mutes highs. The nervous system adapts, and what once felt pleasant becomes neutral. Happiness fades, not because life is bad, but because nothing stretches it. Understanding this lesson reframes dissatisfaction. Restlessness isn't always a problem to fix. Sometimes it's a signal that comfort has replaced growth. Happiness doesn't live in ease alone. It lives where engagement, purpose, and emotional risk are allowed to exist. Confidence comes from experience, not affirmation. This lesson challenges the comforting idea that belief alone creates confidence. Affirmations can soothe emotions, but they don't build trust in ability. Confidence is not something the mind decides. It is something the nervous system learns, and it learns through evidence. Experience provides that evidence. Each time you act, face uncertainty, and survive the outcome, your brain updates its understanding of what you can handle. Confidence forms when the nervous system recognizes patterns of resilience. Words cannot replace that process because they lack proof. Affirmations often fail because the mind knows when it's being reassured without support. Telling yourself you are capable while avoiding action creates internal conflict. The brain hears the statement, then scans reality for confirmation. When it finds none, doubt grows stronger. This is why confidence feels solid after repetition. You've been there before. You've failed, adapted, and continued. The memory of action becomes reassurance. Confidence is embodied, not imagined. Experience also teaches limits. It shows where growth is needed and where strength already exists. This makes confidence grounded rather than inflated. It doesn't rely on constant reinforcement because it's built on familiarity with challenge. Understanding this lesson shifts focus from motivation to movement. You don't wait to feel confident to act. You act, and confidence follows. Affirmation can support the journey, but it cannot replace it. Confidence grows from doing, not declaring. People protect their identity even at the cost of truth. This lesson reveals that truth is not judged objectively, it is filtered through identity. Beliefs are not just ideas people hold, they are extensions of who they think they are. Challenging a belief often feels like challenging the self. The brain responds to that challenge as if it were a personal attack. Identity provides stability. It answers questions about belonging, values, and meaning. When new information threatens that structure, the nervous system reacts defensively. Logic is dismissed, evidence is minimized, and contradictions are ignored, not because they are weak, but because accepting them would require dismantling a familiar self-image. Emotionally, this explains why people cling to beliefs even when they cause harm. Letting go would mean admitting they were wrong, misled, or inconsistent. That admission feels like loss. Protecting identity feels safer than confronting truth. This lesson also explains why debates rarely change minds. Facts don't fail because they are inaccurate, but because they threaten belonging and self-worth. Truth demands flexibility, identity demands consistency. Understanding this reveals why growth is rare and slow. It requires the courage to loosen identity and tolerate uncertainty. Until someone values truth more than self-protection, the mind will continue to defend who they believe they are, even when that defense costs them clarity, growth, and connection. Being misunderstood is part of being authentic. This lesson reveals a cost that comes with living truthfully. Authenticity disrupts expectations. When you stop performing versions of yourself that are easy to label or predict, people lose the ability to place you neatly into their existing categories. That confusion often turns into misunderstanding. Most people don't see you as you are. They see you through their own assumptions, experiences, and needs. When you act in ways that don't align with those projections, discomfort arises. Instead of updating their understanding, many people reinterpret your behavior to fit their existing narrative. Being authentic means acting in alignment with your values, not with how others prefer to understand you. This creates friction. Nuance gets lost. Depth gets simplified. Intentions get misread. The more complex and honest you are, the harder it becomes for others to fully grasp you. Misunderstanding isn't always a communication failure. Often, it's a refusal to see beyond familiar versions of you. People tend to understand what confirms their expectations and distort what challenges them. This is why authenticity can feel isolating. You're no longer managing perception, and without that management, others fill the gaps themselves. But authenticity isn't about being accurately interpreted. It's about being internally aligned. Understanding this lesson removes the need to constantly explain yourself. Clarity can help, but it won't eliminate misunderstanding. Being real means accepting that some people will never fully see you, not because you're unclear, but because they're not ready to look beyond who they expect you to be. Your nervous system remembers what your mind forgets. This lesson reveals why experiences continue to shape behavior long after they fade from conscious memory. The mind may forget events, details, and timelines, but the nervous system stores emotional patterns. It remembers how situations felt, not how they were explained. Those sensations become reflexes. When something once felt unsafe, the body learned how to respond. Even if the memory is no longer accessible, the reaction remains. Tightness, avoidance, hypervigilance, or emotional shutdown can appear without a clear reason. The body is responding to a past it still recognizes. This is why logic often fails to calm emotional reactions. You can know you are safe and still feel threatened. The nervous system operates faster than thought. It reacts before the mind has time to evaluate the present moment. Unprocessed experiences are not forgotten. They are stored somatically. The body holds on to what was never resolved, especially moments involving fear, shame, or helplessness. These imprints influence how people relate, trust, and protect themselves. Understanding this lesson changes how healing is approached. Insight alone is not enough. The nervous system must experience safety repeatedly to update its responses. What the mind releases, the body must relearn. Until then, the past continues to live quietly inside the present. Peace often comes from acceptance, not answers. This lesson reveals why searching for clarity can sometimes deepen unrest instead of resolving it. The mind believes that if it can just understand enough, analyze enough, or explain enough, peace will arrive. But many forms of distress do not come from lack of information. They come from resistance to what already is. The brain seeks answers because answers promise control. They suggest that uncertainty can be eliminated and discomfort resolved, but life rarely offers complete explanations. Waiting for answers keeps the nervous system in a state of tension, scanning for closure that may never come. Acceptance works differently. It doesn't solve the problem, it softens the fight against it. When you accept reality as it is, without needing it to make sense immediately, the nervous system relaxes. The struggle quiets. Emotional energy that was spent resisting becomes available for presence. This is why some questions feel endless. Why did this happen? Why did they leave? Why did things change? Answers, even when found, often fail to soothe because the pain wasn't caused by ignorance. It was caused by loss, change, or disappointment. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means acknowledging what cannot be changed in this moment. That acknowledgement removes friction. Peace arrives not because everything is understood, but because the need to keep fighting reality dissolves. When resistance ends, calm can exist even in uncertainty. People crave clarity, but resist responsibility. This lesson reveals a quiet contradiction at the center of human behavior. People desperately want clear answers, clear paths, and clear explanations because clarity reduces anxiety, it removes uncertainty, and makes life feel manageable. The mind finds comfort in knowing what is happening and what should be done. Responsibility, however, threatens that comfort. Responsibility means ownership of outcomes, consequences, and mistakes. It removes the ability to blame circumstances, timing, or other people. While clarity feels like relief, responsibility feels like pressure. One calms the nervous system, the other activates fear. This is why people seek advice but hesitate to act. They want direction without obligation. Clarity allows them to feel informed and prepared while avoiding the weight of execution. The moment responsibility enters, clarity becomes dangerous because it eliminates excuses. Emotionally, this creates stagnation. People wait for certainty before acting, not realizing that responsibility is what creates clarity over time. Action produces feedback. Feedback creates understanding. Avoiding responsibility freezes the process. This lesson explains why people complain about confusion while rejecting accountability. They want answers that don't require courage. But clarity without responsibility changes nothing. Until someone accepts ownership of their choices, clarity remains a comforting idea rather than a force that actually reshapes their life. Familiar misery feels safer than uncertain growth. This lesson exposes why people stay stuck even when they know something is harming them. Misery that is familiar feels predictable. The brain knows how to survive it. It understands the rules, the emotional rhythms, and the coping mechanisms required. Uncertain growth, however, removes that map. Growth demands stepping into the unknown. The mind loses its reference points, and without reference points, the nervous system activates fear. Even when growth promises relief, the uncertainty surrounding it feels threatening. The brain would rather endure known pain than risk unfamiliar instability. Familiar misery also carries identity. People learn who they are inside struggle. They build narratives around endurance, sacrifice, or survival. Letting go of misery means letting go of a version of the self that feels defined and real. Growth challenges that identity and asks for reinvention. This is why logic alone doesn't create change. Knowing something is unhealthy doesn't override the comfort of predictability. The brain prioritizes emotional safety over long-term improvement. It chooses what feels controllable, not what feels freeing. Misery becomes safe when it's rehearsed. Growth feels dangerous because it hasn't been lived yet. The mind fills that gap with imagined failure, loss, or regret. Understanding this lesson reframes resistance. Fear doesn't mean you're incapable of growth. It means you're standing at the edge of unfamiliar ground. The pull of familiar misery isn't weakness, it's conditioning. And the discomfort of growth isn't a warning, it's the cost of stepping into a life the brain hasn't learned how to predict yet.